Okay. Take two.
Thank you, Barb. So we were having technical difficulties and we are back and running. And so just to recap, just really quick, there was a question about documents in board docs and logging in and such. Board docs, the memo about the wellness check is a public open record. So that does not, you do not need to log in to be able to view that document. So all is good. And then we were, I think, responding, Dr. Jenkins was responding to questions about the staffing and in the wellness check. So answering board member Morelli's question. So Dr. Jenkins, do you want to jump back in, or do you remember what you were saying?
Actually, I was trying to get your attention.
I'm going to get you back in there, Dr. Jen.
I'm
So we can't hear them, right?
I don't hear
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. No, actually, I was trying to get the attention of everyone. Dr. Esser had just responded, and I was just trying to get your attention and to let you know that you could not hear us as we were speaking.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that. We have now rectified that issue. Were there any other questions or comments, Board Member Castro?
Yeah, I was wondering if we had some detailed information or an analysis of the contact tracing so far of the cases in our schools, whether there is transmission within the schools or the schools are simply catching the cases through our screening process, and any recommended things if we have to review the mitigation efforts.
Want to speak to that? No, Wendy?
Yep. Yeah, that's a good question. Thus far, our contact tracing has not led us to believe that there is transmission within the classrooms, that transmission is, just within the community. And I think just for everybody to really appreciate that really high level of detail, which follows the Dane County Public Health and CDC recommendations and guidance on contact tracing. And so we are, from what I'm hearing from our medical advisor, Dr. DeMurray, who we meet with every week during our metrics meetings, MMSD does a really, really good job at this, and we're one of the strongest districts at kind of leading this work, and again, to keep our students in school, so.
Thank you.
Great.
I have one thing
Thank
to
you,
add
sir.
to that. Can you hear me? One thing to add is that I get questions from parents and others about right aligned with that question, if we're causing it or not, and why are we quarantining if it's not happening, at the school, if we're really not contacting it. And I've shared with parents that it's a preventive measure on our part to make sure that there is no spread. And if you wanted to add any clarification to that, Nurse Wendy.
No, Dr. Jenkins, that is absolutely on point, that anytime there is a positive case, there is going to be contact tracing that is done. And so those numbers that I shared initially with those positive cases, and then there's more cases of quarantining due to contact tracing, that is going to happen, right? Because I think if we think about our kiddos in schools and we have that layered mitigation strategy, but we all know, right, that kids pull masks down and all of those things. So exactly as Dr. Jenkins just said, there's going to be quarantining due to contact tracing from positive cases. That means the nurses and the health office staff are doing exactly what they're supposed to do to keep students safe.
Thank you for that. Board Member Vandermeulen, go ahead.
Yes. In the memo, it talks about a COVID checklist on closing classrooms, but it didn't include it. Is there a way we could get a copy of that checklist?
Theoretically, yes. Let me review it though to confirm there's nothing confidential in there, but I can't imagine that there is, Nikki, and so I can work with Dr. Jenkins and Barb on that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate it.
And
I
just,
got a lot of questions on it.
yeah, please keep in mind that what that is intended for is an internal checklist for our team to be using when we're supporting schools when a classroom closes. So what links do they need in order to shift to virtual instruction? What reminders do they need for access to food service? So this document is living and breathing and will be updated on a very regular basis to represent what we learn.
I understand that. I just wanted to see, because I have no knowledge on what we do when we close it, and a lot of people ask that, and I just say that there are protocols we follow, but I'd like to be able to read what they are.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Board Member Goldman-Schmidt.
Yeah, thank you. Chair Pearson, I just wanted to check with Leah. It seems like I was reading, did we update that on the website recently with the information about how that contact tracing is done? Is that new on the website? Because it seems like there's a lot of good information there.
Yes, and Wendy mentioned this in her talking points, but thanks for mentioning it. We just released, and Board Member Gomes-Schmidt had some sneak peeks of this in our metrics meeting, but just released a new website that really clearly outlines how we contact trace, how you're determined to be a close contact, and when you will need to isolate or quarantine. But it also talks about when we make decisions to close classrooms. So our communications department did a beautiful job of helping create some videos that are in manageable chunks as well. So we encourage the public to check those out.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions before we move on? Okay. Seeing none, let's go on to early literacy and beyond status update. And that is going to be done by the curriculum instruction team, Kaylee, Dr. Gabby Bell, and the chief of school.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would just like to say thank you so much for this opportunity to come before you this afternoon to provide you an update on this most important initiative. I'd like to say, first of all, that this initiative is fully in alignment with our vision statement. Every child will graduate from high school ready for college, career, and community. As I read that statement, I can't help but focus on the adjective ready. You know, and if we're truly going to ensure that all of our students are ready, we have to lean in on literacy. We have to ensure that all of our young people graduate proficient readers, writers, and speakers. With that said, I am so delighted to bring the team forward today to give you an update on the work that we're doing just to ensure just that. Tonight, we have with us Ms. Kaylee Jackson, the Executive Director of Curriculum Instruction. We have Principal of Chavez Elementary School, Ms. Kelly Lawler, and then we have her instructional coach, Ms. Linda Zimmerman. And so they will be coming forth to give us an update in regards to the work that we're doing there. Now, at this time, I'm going to mute myself and turn it over to the experts. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Pryor. Thank you, board. Excited to give you our updates. Barb, would you mind screen sharing our presentation for tonight? Thank you, Barb. And you can go to the third slide. Wonderful. Oh, back one. Perfect. All right. So thank you again for this opportunity to be able to share with you all tonight. We're really excited for our updates. So first question is what is early literacy and beyond? And early literacy and beyond is a multi-pronged approach, creating more equitable reading results in our district. And a large part of that is the science of reading, which is rooted in approximately 20 years of research into how the brain works, how to read. And the way we're doing that is through LETRS professional development. LETRS professional development really teaches our teachers everywhere from phonemic awareness to vocabulary and reading comprehension, and really gets at being able to identify the specifics that our students have in reading deficits. And so we're doing this throughout the district to ensure that we, as a whole district, are speaking the same language as it comes to the science of reading and really being able to tackle the reading deficits that we see throughout the districts. Next slide, Barb. So we've been on a journey, just like everything else, right? When we want systemic change, we need to start somewhere, and we've been on a journey. But we have not started this change this year. We have not started this journey last year either. We started this journey years ago with students, with schools who were focusing their professional development on literacy, with really leaning into our school improvement work. And what we want to be sure of as a district is that this learning that we are engaging in as a district outlasts the current administration, right? This isn't about a quick fix. This is about truly equipping our teachers with the pedagogy and the understanding so that our kids, kids, and our kids' kids, and everyone that comes after them really see long-lasting, equitable results that we will see in their literacy proficiency. Next slide, Barb. Thank you. And so here's a quick update with our LETRS professional development. So in March, we engaged 130 staff members, including CNI staff, coaches, reading interventionists, and reading teachers and interventionists in this professional learning. We really wanted to be sure that we had a large group of people ahead of the learning so that they could support the learning within their buildings. And we're happy to report that we had 135 staff members engage in units 1 through 4 in March, and 131 of those staff members have completed those units. And 131 of those units are of those staff members are engaged now in units 5 through 8. And then we look at our LETRS completion data and that's an edit. It should be 4K through 5, 6, and 9. That started this fall and started during Welcome Back PD. And we had a really heavy lift during Welcome Back PD with our teachers completing unit 1. We also had the plan then that we would slow down the pace in order to complete units 2 through 4. But as we really focus on humanity and lean into humanity, we had to look at this data and we really had to think about our timing and our pacing and center the social emotional needs of both our staff and our students. Next slide, Barb. And so we're going to lean into excellence a little bit. Next slide, Barb. We're really excited because as we're on this journey, that is a continual journey, we know that we are engaged in the right work, okay? The simple view of reading, which is right here on this screen, tells us that reading comprehension is the product of both word recognition and language comprehension. And our teachers are excited. Our teachers see the value of this work, both because of the professional development that they're engaging in, but also because we have written our instructional guidance all throughout K through 12 to really focus on and have the simple view of reading, which here serves the plate for both how our minutes are being used and also the uplift of our resources and platforms. Next slide, Barb. And so let's lean into equity just a little bit. On this next slide, you will see why we are focusing on early literacy and beyond. We're focusing on it because our data points to it. And as we center goals 2 and 3, that every school is a place where children, staff, and families thrive, and that African-American children and youth will excel in school, we see that we have an opportunity for growth, okay? Reading is a national challenge. And what we learn in our professional development around LETRS is that reading actually is not a natural thing. the brain works in very strategic and systemic ways. And we must be able to understand how the brain works in order to be able to read. Next slide. Next slide, Barb. And so we want to focus on our humanity with early literacy and beyond as well. And in doing that on this next slide, you'll be able to see the quotes of some of our leaders from elementary, middle, and high school, and how the early literacy and beyond strategy, specifically letters, is being uplifted. Right? We're lifting every voice to be able to share how this is actually playing out in our schools and in our classrooms. At this point, I want to introduce to you Kelly Lawler, principal of Chavez, and Linda Zimmerman, the Chavez's incredible instructional coach, to be able to share with you their experience with letters in the classroom.
Thank you, Kaylee, and good evening, everyone. And board, it's an honor to be with you tonight. Again, Kelly Lawler, principal at Chavez. And as an instructional leader, one of the things that I really lean into and value is the value of teacher teaming and collective efficacy. And this letters work has provided a common learning and a new understanding in which our teacher teams are coming together around and having conversations around instruction and the new scopes and their new learning. And we're seeing that translate into new practices, most importantly, for our scholars. And I'm gonna let Linda share a little bit about what some of our teachers are saying.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly. So I just wanna first of all lift a few of the voices at our school and a couple of the comments that they've made. We love having a phonics instruction program that helps us systematically teach phonics to our students. It's extremely useful to know and understand the developmental levels of phonics skills as a way of guiding our teaching. And it has been valuable to begin to truly understand the why, sort of that science behind the reading and writing mistakes that we see in kids and how to help correct them. We like that it shows us how to assign specific targeted teaching tasks to our scholars. And this coursework allows us to move forward with a particular scholar or a group of scholars who may be stuck in a more meaningful way. However, from a coaching perspective too, I just want to mention the direct impact that letters has on our scholars. It will reduce reading failure. It's systematic and explicit, as we said. We're not assuming that our scholars are coming to us with any kind of phonics background knowledge. We're explicitly modeling and teaching these skills in a systematic, developmentally appropriate manner. Letters continues to add tools to our staff's toolbox. And right now, as Kaylee said, this dovetails really nicely with what the district is providing in its scopes and its instructional guidance for teachers. I've heard nothing but positive feedback from our staff and the gains that have been made in the very short amount of time that we've been in school. Our staff are discussing their scholars in their teacher team meetings. They're conversing about where they're at and what they might do strategically next with those scholars. There's a lot of excitement around the letters program.
Thank you, Linda and Kelly. We're really happy to have your voices and your work with us. Appreciate that very much. Next slide, Barb. So let's lean in and have a little conversation about our intentionality with this work. Next slide, Barb. So we want to, and we need to, be able to take a pause and just sit and reflect and adjust. In full transparency, we came out with a really aggressive timeline, right? The energy and the excitement and the need of our students really benefiting from this science of reading is something that weighs super heavy on our hearts. And because of that, we went full steam ahead. However, we needed to stop and pause and listen to the voices of our stakeholders and listen to the voices of our staff and our teachers and our principals. And we had to sit with that for a second. And in that, we realized we're still in a pandemic and we still have very real social emotional needs for both our staff and our students. And because of that, we've been working with cross-functional teams and committees to reflect on the rollout of letters and to ensure that the rollout of letters is one that is going to create systemic change for decades to come. All right. And so what we're doing now is we are adjusting the pace. Okay. We're adjusting the pace to engaging with letters for one Monday a month, with the goal of having this first cohort complete by 2025. In full transparency, myself, Dr. Pryor, the chiefs, the whole teaching and learning team, we were ready. And we wanted to go, like I said, full steam ahead. But it is incredibly important to be sure that we have all of us in a room, our teachers, principals, MTI, and to tweak our cadence so that we continue to focus, again, on the long view, which is systemic change for decades to come. So we appreciate your time tonight, and we open it up for any questions.
Okay, any questions? Go ahead. Sigmund.
May I lean in with one additional comment while everyone is musing over their questions? And first of all, thank you so much, Kaylee, for your leadership in this work. I don't think anyone could ever question your passion for this work and your commitment to this work. And I think most often we see Kaylee's face as the face of letters, as they call it. But this is a collaboration of all departments and all of our building leaders and teachers all across this district. But I really wanted to lean in just a little more on the piece that Kaylee just covered. Dr. Jenkins has been very clear from the onset about the power of collaborating and lifting teacher voice, lifting principal's voice in this work. And Kaylee was exactly right. We were all very passionate. We remain very passionate about this work because we do see this as an opportunity. And we jumped out of the gate and we were full steam ahead. And as we stated earlier this week, really offering a sincere apology to our teachers and principals because they lifted their voices. And we heard you. We see you. We hear you. One of the things that we promised that we were going to be visible in schools, and we're there. And that allowed us the space to be able to see you and have these conversations. And so, right, we heard you and we tweaked this. And I want everybody to know we not only tweaked it, but we had a follow-up meeting as well. And we have other meetings to guide our steps as we move forward with this. This is a very, very, very important initiative. You know, we all collectively want to make sure that our scholars are successful upon graduating from MMSD. And I think we will all collectively agree that literacy skills are perhaps one of the most dominant skills and most needed skills that our scholars need in order to be successful at the next level. And so again, you know, when Dr. Jenkins came up with the vision for this year about leaning forward together through excellence, equity, humanity, and intentionality, I think this is a clear picture of how powerful things can be when we move together. I know for a fact that teachers are more comfortable, principals are more comfortable, and we realize that some schools are in different spaces, and we will continue to work with those schools, you know, that desire to move aggressively forward, you know, if their staff so desire, and we're going to continue to provide support to them. But the main thing, we wanted to make sure that we lift the humanity piece because we're still in a pandemic. And so we're taking the long view, and we're going to get there, and we're going to see the results, and we're going to do what's right for children. So I just wanted to lift that. So I'll be quiet now, and we'll take on questions as we have.
Thank you, Dr. Pryor.
You're welcome.
for saying that. We'll take the board president, Metro. Can you guys hear her? No?
No, not now. No.
Barb, we can't hear Ollie. Ollie, we still can't hear you. Okay. Okay. Okay, we're going to have to look to have another short, brief recess as we're having more technical difficulties.
Oh, we hear.
All right, can y'all hear me?
Yes.
Oh,
Yes.
my goodness. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Let's see if that works.
You want to mute?
Yes.
Hey, Maya, we're going to have to take ourselves off mute to participate in the conversation one at a time, and y'all are not going to Barb. So if Barb chimes in, one of us will come off mute, probably Dr. Jenkins, to let you know what she's saying.
Okay, thank you.
Kaylee, thank you
With
so much for that presentation. Dr. Priors, thank you so much for what you spoke to, kind of rounding that presentation out. I want to say about 10 years ago, we invested in our last kind of approach to literacy, which was the, if I'm not mistaken, the Mundo curriculum. And so I guess if it's going to take about 5 years to get folks orientated to this, how do we factor in staff leaving and retiring and moving on, and orientating our newer staff to the science of reading? And also, how long does this investment last? 10 years from now, will we be looking at another approach to literacy?
I can answer some of that, and then Kaylee can join me or any other team member.
Dr. Pryor?
Oh, man.
We cannot hear you now.
Y'all.
You can't hear me? Can y'all hear me now?
Do you have?
Can you hear me now?
Have your mic on?
All right, let me see if I can switch my mic over.
I can hear you, Dr. Pryor.
Can you hear me now?
I think it's just in the boardroom. Can you hear him in the boardroom?
Can you hear me now?
No, sir.
No? Gosh.
Well, we can hear you, but I don't think the boardroom can.
How about now? No?
So we have transitioned to my phone being the speaker in the room, but we can now hear you.
Wow. Can you hear me now? No?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Go ahead.
So, to that question, and I think it's a two-part, and I know Kaylee stated that we will not reach that final destination until 2025, right? It is our hope that, number one, we made the adjustment and we're in COVID, and we're, again, lifting the humanity of everyone feeling that load. But I'm hoping that when we get on the other side of COVID, that the schools may reach out and want to adjust the timeline that we have here. Also, I would like to lean in that the training that they're engaged in now, we call it bridge to practice. They can immediately lift those skills that they're learning in the training, even at this point. Now, the research is pretty clear in regards to when you really start to see this robust result from this thing, even though it happens in real time. If those are out there are individuals out there that just want to see the difference in test scores, things of that nature, which is that's not the focus. But if we're looking for that, they recommend that it usually starts showing up in about 3 years. But the students are going to be seeing the immediate impact of this through the infusion of these strategies. And you can hear teachers talk about this now, how they're starting to realize the difference that it's making in identifying how to adequately address the gaps that they're seeing in student learners who struggle in reading. And Kaylee can add to that piece as well.
Yes, absolutely, Dr. Pryor. And to your point, we know, right, that we will have to have a long view plan for continuing to engage our new staff in this learning. This is not a one and done sort of a situation, right? This is the science of reading, and this is the work of our district that will continue to last. So that is already something that we are considering to be sure that we are training up all of our people in the district so that we can continue to provide this professional development for years to come, whether it's through letters explicitly or whether it's through internal coaching, because we all have become the masters of this content, right? That's yet to be decided. But this is going to be the way of literacy instruction for our district.
And last but not least, I'm sorry. I was going to address the piece about staff that come and leave that has been privy to the training, and then they take the training with them. And I think that's what we were speaking to. Right, it happens. It happens in every initiative. But I will say this with Dr. Jenkins, that he's so intentional about this. We have a task force who are looking at every aspect of this work. And, through some of my conversations, I know one of the pieces is actually with our local colleges looking at their practice as to how they're preparing. Do they need to really revisit their curriculum to ensure that their graduates are coming out already trained? And so we're hoping that that will materialize as a result of this task force that we have in place that eventually you're going to hear more about. I think they're coming up in about a month from now, hopefully, or 2 months from now, to give you an update as to some of the recommendations that they're making. So hopefully that will balance out there. But that is a true concern when you invest dollars in training people and then they leave. But it happens all around the country. And that's one of the things that is problematic. I wish we could lock people into a contract for years, but it doesn't really work that way. And I'm not sure if Dr. Jenkins would like to add to that or not.
So I want to expand on the question in terms.
Hey, Ali, can you turn your mic off and see if it works now?
I think it's just one of us. Okay. So expanding on that question, in terms of teaching literacy in multiple languages, right? When you talk about our approach to dual language immersion, when you talk about our approach to potentially Madison Mandarin, when you talk about coding or other things that are going to be necessary tools, right? Being able to read in multiple languages, being able to interact with literacy via technology. How are we making sure that we're giving kids the skills they need to have an expansive relationship with literacy and also navigate the future of literacy, given the science of reading as our primary approach?
So, Ali, that's a great question. What we have been doing, and one of our intentional moves with having the 135 staff engage in this conversation or engage in this letters training before everyone else, was we made sure that we had some of our leaders who are working in our DLI schools engage in that learning as well, right? So that we can see how this applies to students who are English language learners. And to be fully transparent, right, we're in a phase right now where we just need to understand the science. We just need to learn it so that we can then engage in those conversations cross-collaboratively and then go back to the drawing board and say, okay, now that we have this new understanding, what are the implications for everything else? What are the implications for scheduling? What are the implications for how we approach this in ESL? What are the implications for how we approach this with the use of technology as well, right? Right now, we've got the majority of our identified staff through Unit 1, but this is 8 units of learning, right? And so as we engage in this conversation and we really center making sure all of the voices are at the table, those are the conversations and the solutions that we're really leaning into so that we're sure that this is not, a one size fits all, but that this is a systemic approach throughout all of our programs to ensure that, our literacy scores improve.
Thank you, Kaylee, for that. And thank you, President Milcho, for that question. Any other questions, please raise your hand just so I know, like your virtual hand. Okay. Board Member Gomez-Schmidt.
Okay, Ms. Gomez, let's go first. Go ahead.
Thank you. Did you have something, Dr. Jenkins?
Yeah, I was just going to add a little bit to what we had Ms. Jackson talking about there. It's really the biliteracy approach early on. So the science of reading, it blends very well when you start talking about ELL, and having had various ELL settings in immersion schools. What we found and what the literature talks about too is immersing our Spanish immersion or native Spanish speakers or students who are learning other languages early on. And the science of reading from a foundational standpoint is bigger than just the basics of it, but it's also understanding the science behind teaching someone those fundamental reading skills, which we have missed, particularly when students come who are language rich, perhaps in their own native language, and then how we're transferring that. So it's a biliteracy approach early on that's going to capture not only help us. Okay. I can turn my mic.
Mute yourself and see if it works.
No,
But we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Echo.
Okay.
It's echoing.
Go to separate rooms with your laptop, and each of you can do whatever you need to do in that room. But at least we're on a better speaker system that way, and we're off the conference phone. So we just want to pause for a minute again and separate you so that you're not getting.
Okay, so it looks like we probably need to take. Are we taking a tech break? Okay, we need to vote really quick.
I think it's just a couple of minutes, Maya, and
Okay.
we don't need to vote. It's just a quick break. It looks like folks are moving to different rooms.
I see. Got it. Thank you, everyone, for bearing with us, especially everyone out there that's watching. Okay, looks like everyone is going to other rooms. Ollie, can you say something?
Can you hear me?
Yes, it's a little echoey, but I can hear you.
Okay, I think I'm going to relocate to eliminate the echo because you're hearing me both on the TV and the computer.
I see. Thank you.
Oh, okay, wait. Barb wants me to stay here.
Okay.
Can you hear me now without the echo?
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
better.
That's way better.
Okay.
Okay, and then Chris quickly, can you say something? I just want to make sure I can hear you.
Can you hear me?
Perfect, thank you. And Megan? Can you say something so I know I can hear you?
Vivian.
Yep, I can hear y'all.
Okay. And Dr. Jenkins, you good?
I'm good. Thank you.
Okay. I think that's everyone that needed to relocate. Okay. I think, Dr. Jenkins, you were saying something in response to Kaylee's point, and then we'll move to Board Member Gomes-Schmidt.
I think I had said the essence of it, the whole idea around it is the biliteracy approach, and then using the science, no matter if it's a native speaker, bringing in a language-rich opportunity for our students and those who have been heavily immersed in another language coming in and just taking the biliteracy approach. That's what we're seeing, but the foundational skills between where students are beyond just the phonics and phonemic awareness and students understanding context and being able to comprehend and knowing the meaning of the various words. Now I'll just stop right there, won't belabor it.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Board Member Gomes-Schmidt, ask a question.
Thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the question that Board President Muldrow had asked about the reading curriculum. So she had mentioned Mondo, which was a reading curriculum from probably a decade ago, maybe, that was selected by the district. And I feel like we need to clarify a little bit. It feels like we're on a journey like side by side. We're doing this professional development in the science of reading and how students learn how to read. But we are also in the process that was paused during COVID of selecting a new reading curriculum, a new literacy curriculum to complement that. Can you, I guess, Kaylee, explain how those two things fit together and where we are in the literacy selection process? Or the literacy curriculum, I guess?
Yes, certainly. Happy to. So Mondo there's two things happening. You're absolutely right about this. Mondo is a curriculum. Letters is a professional development, right? Two different things. Curriculum means resources for students. Professional development means understanding, giving our teachers and our staff the pedagogy to really uplift the science of reading through whatever resource is selected. And so Mondo served as the resource and as the curriculum years ago. So yes, two things are simultaneously happening. Now, when we had originally planned for the literacy adoption at the elementary level, it was a matter of two things. We wanted to be sure that we had a common pedagogy and understanding around the science of reading, right? Delivered largely through letters professional development. And then we also had to consider the time that it would take for our teachers to engage in letters, as well as the time that it would take for our teachers to engage in the professional development that would also come with adopting a brand new curriculum, right? We can't just plop a curriculum into teachers' laps without also giving them the professional development alongside it. So with our adapted pacing with letters, that also is going to likely mean an adapted pacing then in our literacy curriculum. In full transparency, our elementary schools are so excited to have a new a literacy curriculum. And so that is one of the things that we are exploring right now is how and if, right, we can continue on a timeline that's going to get literacy materials in their laps while also having this adapted slow pace while not overburdening anyone and also still adhering obviously to our board policies. So that is something that we are hearing certainly from our elementary schools that they're really excited about that. And that's something that we're exploring. Now with that, what we are doing in the meantime is ensuring that the district guidance written by the curriculum and instruction team lends itself exactly to that simple view of reading, right? And so there are already changes like the addition of the foundational skills block to the literacy, the district-wide scopes that are taking the simple view of reading into effect in a way that it hasn't been taken into effect from the district in years past.
Okay, I appreciate that. So hopefully with slowing down in one part, we may be able to do these two things in tandem. And I guess, I mean, is that correct?
Let me add this, if I may help. I think Ms. Jackson explained it totally correct, but one of the things in it that we all sometimes are forgetting, you're still in the midst of a pandemic and our teachers are being overwhelmed. And I think she was saying it nicely, but I'm gonna have to just say, when I say they're overwhelmed, it's everything that we think to add, well-intended, but it's adding a burden onto our staff. And if it's a burden on the staff, it's a burden on the students. So we're trying to find our way through this in the midst of this pandemic to the point that we cause no harm. And if we could systematically, like everything in terms of any implementation, it's about systematically doing it, but at a pace that can be doable for everyone. And I don't want to lose sight of the fact that there is a lot of social emotional happening with staff right now. We haven't even gotten to the education effectiveness, as a teacher wrote me today, and talking about that. It's a lot we're trying to balance. I know we all want it and we want it right now. 10 years from now is not the same 10 years when you're going through a pandemic. We don't know when this is going to end, but we know we want to lean forward together. So I think, as Dr. Pryor talked about earlier, we want to hear the voices. We want to work together to get it done. And I don't want to give you a false sense of pride that we're going to be ready by next semester or next year. But I can tell you, if we're leaning forward together, we're going to make the progress and at the same time, take care of our people. If our people, students, the staff and parents, community can come out of this healthy with us having made some advancement, I think that's pretty noble for all of us to do.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. And I just want to say, I was not suggesting that we try to add one more thing next semester, not at all. I just know that it's a huge planning process to do that part too. And knowing that our district staff is also working tremendously hard to do the letters and the professional development piece. But we had a community process going around the literacy initiative and choosing a new literacy curriculum. So I want to make sure when we get back to that, I guess my suggestion leading towards that was, let's not forget the community piece. And if we're going to involve community members on those cross-functional teams or whoever is advising on this process, if we can make sure that even in a pandemic that we're involving community voices in that. I want to say that I really appreciate the adjustment of the timeline. I guess one of my questions is when were we supposed to finish and how much time has it added? And fully appreciate Dr. Pryor's suggestion that, we can readjust as we go. And if we find we have built, building capacity to accelerate again, we can do that, down the road. But 2025, were we supposed to be done in 2023 or 2024? How much time does it add on the end, I guess?
Great question. And first, yes, we will certainly center community and have community voices at the table as we're going through this curriculum adoption. Thank you for that. And the original timeline was to end at the end of next year, so 2023. And so our current pace has us ending at 2025, but as Dr. Pryor said, we can always revisit when we are not in the middle of a pandemic.
Right. And I appreciate that using the skills that teachers are going to learn along the way. It's not you have to get to the end to start using what you're learning. It's a process all along the way. And I appreciate Dr. Pryor's comments on that too. My last question is about the adjustment at the high school level. I know sort of the question there wasn't necessarily just the pacing, but if it was appropriate for the high school teachers to be doing this training, or if we were going to adjust to something that complemented it. Are we still working that piece out?
Yes, great question. So we have been in collaboration with high school principals and with high school instructional coaches who, again, are ahead of the pacing, right? So they've already experienced units 1, 2, 3, and 4. And what we are doing is we're working alongside them to adjust the content, right? So the simple view of reading, that equation doesn't change regardless of if you're 4 or 40 years old. But what we do want to do is we want to work with our high schools in order to personalize the learning for them, particularly the bridge to practice, to ensure that we're actually applying this learning in a way that is appropriate for high school readers. And so we know based off of our data that there is still a need. There's certainly a need to address reading comprehension at our high school. And because of that, we are working with the instructional coaches, again, who have leaned into this learning already to truly adapt the learning and the content that occurs at the high school level. So they may not be engaging in all units, right? We may pick units that are most applicable and then supplement with other resources and learning that is specific to the secondary. But the science of reading does not change, right? But that is something that we are looking forward to building alongside them.
And in conversation with our principals and MTI representatives on building reps, we learned too, what we kind of knew in terms of some of the staff are also questioning whether or not, is this the best strategy? Or is it a past strategy that we need to use, or do we need to do something else? And what we've committed to, not only having a conversation on Thursday, but to continue to stay in conversation. We all agree 100% it's not acceptable for 61% of the students to arrive at high school based on the assessment that we have. Not saying that it's the only assessment, but not being proficient. And then we want to make sure we graduate our students ready, for college and for the careers in the community. So we know we're going to have to take some approach. We're using this as kind of a base board, but we're going to be listening to our staff as well and seeing what can we all commit to doing to ensure we gain that level of success. That's why we talk about early literacy and beyond. It's beyond just our elementary level or middle, but we want to also be able to ensure parents, when our students are graduating, that they're going to be ready as learners when they leave us.
Thank you. And just so you know, I'm with you on the urgency, with you on the need to adapt when we figure out we need to adapt, but really appreciate the work that's going on with us. Thanks.
I really appreciated your questioning here, though, Board Member Gomez-Smith, too. And I just want everybody to know that we're in this together. And the questioning that comes from the board, comes from the community, comes from the staff. And I just thought it was an amazing, and I really appreciated the staff pushing. And they weren't pushing back. They were pushing together. How do we get, move this forward on behalf of all of our students? It's not personal. And we do openly welcome any discussion that we can have in the future on this topic.
Thank you for that question, and thank you for the responses. Board Member Cashel.
Yeah, thank you so much to the teachers who spoke up and how responsive your team was, Ms. Jackson, to this need to recalibrate the pacing. I guess my question is a little bit broad, kind of related to Board Member Muldrow's question, but there is incredible linguistic diversity in the English language. And so how are we, can someone speak to how we are utilizing phonemic awareness to understand that linguistic diversity in language and not perpetuates stereotypes or looking down on certain dialects?
Beautiful question. And in full transparency, Board Member Castro, this has been a conversation that has come up through our training, right? Because so often we say that there is one way to speak, right? There's a right way and there's a wrong way, but that is not true. Our cultures influence how we speak, how we pronounce words. And so there's a level of humanity that needs to go into the teaching of reading and the teaching of literacy. And so as we explore the science of reading, and as we explore how different phonemes make different sounds, we are also exploring how our cultures have impacted that, right? And as humans and as individuals with hearts and who love children and who are open to other perspectives, that's something that we are currently challenging. You know, there are certainly different dialects. There are certainly families who come from, you know, different countries. And with that, we have to keep in mind, though that is true, and we honor that, our alphabetic language is one that is rooted on the pronunciation of sounds, right? And as we lean into that and as we learn about that, it's something that has to be done with a level of humanity and awareness and dignity for all of our students. So I guess what I would say to that, Board Member Castro, is you're absolutely right. Our training in the science of reading is really lending us an opportunity to explore those topics, and then to have conversations around how we teach literacy through a lens that focuses yet on the dignity of our students and the diversity of them as well.
Thank you so much for that answer. I think this is a great opportunity where our students don't have to code switch in class anymore, where, you know, it might be useful to know academic English or the Queen's English in times of your life, but your own home language is valued and affirmed too. So thank you.
Thank you for that question, Megan. Board Member Creasy.
Thanks, Maya. Can you hear me? Okay, good. First of all, I want to thank you for this presentation. And more than that, I really want to thank you for listening to our staff, for collaboratively problem solving with them, and for slowing down the pace of this. I think it means the world to our staff to have that extra time to work on everything that comes with COVID and to just be there for their kids in social and emotional ways and not just be caught up in training. I have a couple questions. My first one is about maybe digging a little bit more deeply into letters for our middle school and high school teachers. Do we have any data from the testing we're doing at the middle and the high school level about like specifically what our students need at this level to accelerate their reading? How much of it is phonics versus how much of it is comprehension? And if more of our kids at the upper levels are really getting hung up on comprehension, is letters enough? Is it really the best way to train our teachers to meet the reading comprehension needs of struggling readers who are in middle school and high school? And if not, what else might we be looking at to support those readers?
Let me answer this first, and then Ms. Jackson, if you want to come in. First of all, let me say there is not a silver bullet. I've been studying for years, reading, literacy, and beyond. And there's not a silver bullet. Almost anything out there that you can look at, I've probably seen it in one fashion or another. If I have not, Dr. McGregor has also looked at it as we've been on this journey. And even before we engaged the science of reading, you heard Ms. Jackson speak over the last 20 years, the development of other thought processes, I guess the science, scientific way of looking at how individuals engage in reading. And a lot of the programs or initiative that's out there is based upon grade level expectations. When you have in our district and in other districts, these disparities as they are, I asked Lucy Calkins herself from Balanced Literacy, when you're talking about reading, and a lot of us talk about reading early on because we actually have an expectation universally that students are coming into the 9th grade, at least probably reading on an 8th grade level. That is not the case. And we also have at the middle level, thinking that students have matriculated, but through elementary, coming in, reading of 1 grade level, 2 grade levels behind. As we can clearly see, if we're going to use the former traditional assessments in terms of what is really delineating in terms of some of the disparities, it doesn't necessarily, reading points out one's level of intelligence. It talks about more about exposure. So the state assessment doesn't say whether or not I can actually comprehend, but maybe the language used, which some would call a dominant culture, may not be recognized by us formally. We have a whole nother discussion that we need to be having regarding just how we are assessing our students and if we're putting too much emphasis on assessment altogether, because students are learning and bringing different languages. And at different levels, that means that you need more than just one strategy. It's not a silver bullet. Letters itself, spring, when you're looking at what one of the teachers brought up, one of the administrators about AVID and the literacy part in that, it's not a silver bullet. When you look at the Chief 3000, it's not a silver bullet. Things that we've looked at, we know we need to do this and more when we start talking about literacy. And relevance is really huge. Some of the texts that we're reading in other content areas, when students are engaging in text that's not culturally relevant, we know that that's also an issue. And it's not that necessarily that they can't, they're just disinterested. And I think we need to, as a group, start thinking about how do we calibrate on how we want to really assess to ensure that our students can go into the world as themselves and not have to become a part of someone else thinking of what they should be. So that's what I would say to you. And that's just been years of looking at this whole thing of these disparities. The assessment we take, state assessment, I just have to tell you, I think we can do both, but I think the way that it's set up, there's a perpetual understanding in terms of the disparities based upon a Euro perspective, and children can go other places and they can perform extremely well around the world. And I think we're going to have to start looking at it globally, what we want to do for our learners. And I do think that they can do both, but you don't have to give up yourself to become someone else in order for someone to say that you can read. I'll just stop right there.
I just want to add, I so appreciate you lifting those points, Dr. Jenkins. You know, when I heard the term assessment, you know, I think the purest form of assessment is direct assessment from the teacher. You know, and the thing that is so powerful about the science of reading is that it fosters a deeper understanding of the teacher to adequately and appropriately assess where the kid is struggling. You know, whether or not it is phonics or phonemic awareness, you know, where it could be comprehension or vocabulary or fluency, you know, but that direct interaction from that classroom teacher with that student is the purest form of assessment we need in order to appropriately address where the gaps lie. You know, we can do the more standardized assessments. I will say this, you know, Dr. Jenkins mentioned the fact that there's not a silver bullet, and there isn't. You know, along with this training, we have all kinds of support material for teachers to utilize in their classroom to see whether or not the intervention is really working for students. And it's not necessarily for state assessment or anything, it's really for that kid and for that teacher to ensure that they're doing what is really needed to move that student along. So I just want to emphasize that. But again, there's no one size fit all. We have to be intentional about whatever we use, and we have to really personalize it for every child. And that's where we're headed right here. And so again, wonderful questions here tonight. And it's given us something to also take back and really engage in conversation with, not only with the team at the central office, but all of our teachers and our principals as well. And so we will take these questions back and muse over them even more. Thank you.
Thank you for those responses. I would fully support a proposal to the board in this coming fiscal year to reduce the number of assessments we give our students. 100% on board with that. I also would like to mention that comprehension, one piece of it that doesn't really show up in the simple view of reading, a lot of comprehension is experience. And a lot of giving our students more experiences, you know, is starting at the very early grades with more arts experiences, more hands science experiences, field trips, and just opportunities to play and socialize. All of those experiences give them a base upon which to build reading comprehension. And I think, you know, as much as Letters is going to train teachers, I would hope that by the time we get kids to high school, we've been really intentional about making sure that they've all got a shared base of experience that will help to inform their reading comprehension. Another question about the training. I've heard from some very experienced educators who are starting their letters training, elementary educators, that some of them are finding it kind of slow and repetitive because, even though they haven't gone through this formal program, they know a lot of this stuff. And I'm wondering if there is a way to address the needs of what we might consider advanced educators who maybe don't need all pieces of a unit, maybe just need to engage in part of a unit or could test out of part of a unit so that they can put their time into other things.
I think that's a excellent comment in terms of what some are when we talk about in Wisconsin, and just in terms of any approach, it needs to be systematic because we have teachers who are together in professional learning communities as well, and we want to make sure that everyone is language rich. So we have to calibrate on the language in which we're using around. Not that someone couldn't make a switch and to be able to do that, but I think right now, as we're trying to do it, and as we have looked at previous data for years, and right here in Madison, and those teachers who we can highlight that could become a part of the training for others who are at this point of advancement, it would be great for them to become teachers of teachers. And that's another way to even grow within the profession. But right now, we have no substantial data to suggest that we should move off the pace of not having it being a systematic approach. But I just think there are ways within, because you do have some excellent, no matter where you are, staff in different areas. And I've always encouraged them, hey, take your learning to the next level. And when you're looking at Bloom's taxonomy, right, presentation, teaching others in terms of where we are. So that could be something that we can have more conversation about as we continue to go down this journey. How do we take, just like the highest performing child, how do we take the highest performing staff person and help them continue to grow in a way that's not devaluing their time? That's what I mean.
Thanks for that response. And then my final comment, which you don't have to respond to, but I think we need to keep in mind how important it is to link this letters training strategy to our HR strategy, especially if the timeline is going to be 3 or 4 years before a teacher is fully trained in letters. If our staff turnover rates continue to be high, we're losing that investment that we've made in training staff as well as the staff member. So I think we need to take a holistic view of this and continue to collaborate with our staff and talk to our staff so that not only does letters training respect their humanity, but also, we want them to stay in MMSD. We want them to continue to work here because we're investing in them and their training. And it's expensive to lose that and then have to bring someone else in and start from scratch. That's all my questions. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Kersey. Board Member Vandermeulen.
Yes, hold on, let me take my hand down first. I want to thank you for listening to staff because we don't just want to do a program to teach reading. We want to teach the skills, not just so you can use it in the classroom, but you can use it in life. I think that's crucially important. But here's the other important thing, and this is where I would like to uplift what Christine Groma-Schmidt said, and that's on the school and the literacy curriculum, and why I think they should be tied together is this: use us as much as possible. We can help, we can do meetings, we can do discussions on it, and use the community so that way we can all uplift our students, and that way we all take a role in it. Administration and teachers happen to be overwhelmed at this time too. If we're going to do this together, include all of us. Statutorily, we have permission to do that. Under the statute of 120, it says it should be read broadly, and it does mention choosing curriculum and books that students read. So my question is, can we just expand it so that way everyone can be involved and include as many as possible, that way to spread the work around? I think that would be better. And my main other goal on reading and letters, which is incredibly important to me, is to find a nonverbal trainer. I've looked for one for the 4 years I've been on the board. I know plenty of students who are nonverbal. That doesn't mean they can't read. It doesn't mean they can't learn. It just means they can't speak in a manner that everyone else speaks. And if we want to be able to be language rich, which Savian is an excellent stated, which is an excellent point, AAC is also using augmented communication devices is another way to be language rich with our students and our staff. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments, Member Vandermeulen. Okay, seeing no other hand, I would take that as a move on to the next topic. So special education, and that will be done by Nancy.
Thank you very much, Maya. Good evening, everyone. This is Nancy Molfenter, and Barb, are you able to screen share for me? Thank you very much. So I wanted to first say thank you very much for inviting me to present some updates from Student Services on what's happening in special education. We've been busy and we look forward to sharing this information with you and then also getting some feedback and input from you. So next slide. So the outline for tonight, I just wanted you to know what I will be talking about: additional services, virtual services for our scholars with an IEP, assistive technology, a project we have happening, our staff vacancies, we want to address that briefly, performance measures. That's one of the things we've been very busy on, is deciding on performance measures for this year and moving forward beyond this year. Another critical project we have happening, our anti-racist IEP project, and then some updates about the Parent and Family Advisory Council. Next slide. All right, so we in Student Services, as all across the district, we always seek to ground our work in our district mission and vision to have all of our scholars with an IEP to live, work, and thrive as contributing and valued members of the community, and then also to adhere to the mission of helping all of our scholars to graduate and have high quality, equitable, and inclusive opportunities in our schools and beyond. Next slide. We also talk often in Student Services about our strategic framework goals, college, career, and community ready. Our IEPs are grounded in that, coming from our Department of Public Instruction, as well as the district. We want all of our scholars, staff, and families to thrive. So that includes all of our special education staff across the district. And then, of course, goal number 3, that we really want to, not to overuse a phrase, but I think it's a really good one. In Student Services and special education, we want to lean very, very much into goal number 3 of having our African-American scholars and youth excel in school and improve those experiences. And then we talk about our core values of excellence. All of our scholars have excellence. We want to bring that out. We want them to belong in their schools. We want racial equity and social justice to be at the forefront of our thinking and everything we do. We want staff, student, and scholar voice present, and we want to have a focus on accountability for what we're doing and be creative about solutions, always. All right, diving into content and legal requirements. So some of you may be aware that because of pandemic-related impact on our scholars with an IEP, last year, we conducted analysis. All of our special education case managers conducted analysis for each scholar with an IEP to determine if they were making adequate progress toward the general education curriculum and toward their annual IEP goals. And for scholars that were not making adequate progress in both, we had IEP team meetings and offered additional services. Next slide. So where we wound up was that last year through August of 2021, more than 750 of our scholars did receive additional services. So these were services above and beyond what was listed in the scholars IEP originally. And then we had a really busy summer. We had more than 900 scholars between extended school year services and additional services. So one of the things we did in the department is we added program support teachers for each location over the summer, which was incredibly helpful in supporting our staff, scholars, and families with just connections and ensuring that services were implemented as written and that our principals had a better understanding of why we were providing this scope of services over the summer. We also developed a stipend structure for our special education staff that included teachers as well as special education assistants. I will say with regard to this bullet point that our plan was to pay those stipends no later than early October. And because we had multiple staff who did not turn in timesheets and our payroll department was very clear that they only wanted one batch, we did wind up having delayed payments. So our special education assistants and teachers will both be paid their stipends in their next paychecks. So that's later this month for our special education assistants and on the 1st of November for our teachers. We know that we have some people upset about that. And in the future, if we do anything like this again, we will certainly approach it differently and have more firm deadlines for timesheets. But we didn't want to leave anyone out who had worked. An important piece of information for the board to know is this last bullet point, that because we've had continued impact of the pandemic, we are going to conduct another round of analysis for additional services after first quarter. So as first quarter progress notes are written, we will conduct again and offer additional services one more time for our scholars with an IEP who are not making adequate progress. Board Member Vandermeulen, I see your hand.
I was just getting in the queue for.
Oh, got it. Fabulous. Okay, thank you. I'll take all the questions at the end then. Thank you. All right, next slide, Barb. All right, virtual services for scholars with an IEP or 504 plan. So early in the school year, actually shortly before the school year started, we were hearing from families who were expressing concerns about how buildings or come back in full time due to disability related needs that were connected with health concerns. So some scholars with an IEP are unable to consistently wear a mask because of their disability related needs, and others have health concerns related to their disability related needs. And so we heard that loud and clearly from families. And so at this point, if a family has concerns, and I think we're probably at the point where we have most of our scholars with an IEP who needed to receive services virtually doing so. We may still have some that come up over the course of the year. But what we asked is that the parent reach out to their special education case manager and provide documentation about the need. And then we've asked for the IEP team to put their heads together and make a decision about what services need to be provided virtually, and then have those set up. Next slide. A fun update. I think many of you have seen some information about our Robots on a Mission, which was from the Big Ideas grant. And so that is well underway at this point. Anna Cliff and the assistive technology team in student services have the robots set up, ready to go, and many of them are deployed and helping our scholars who need to be homebound for services to be able to interact with their classmates. I've been able to go visit a couple of scholars in their homes and see this in action, and it truly is amazing to see students interacting on those screens. Next slide. All right, so we recognize that there have been a higher than typical number of special education teacher and special education assistant vacancies at the start of the school year. So what we've done in student services is we've now deployed more than 20 staff. Some are central office staff and some are from our intensive intervention programs to work in schools serving in those roles. So CC teacher vacancies and filling SEA vacancies. We've also added time-limited SEAs at a number of schools. I think we actually have more than 30 now. They don't always get filled, but it does help. I was able to serve as a sub for a time-limited SEA at Senate today. And so it was fantastic to be with teachers and scholars and just to be able to meet people and help out in that way. We've also been working to help principals identify qualified candidates. So myself and assistant directors and special ed coordinators working closely with HR, having them come to our administrative meetings to see who the candidates are. And we participated in the job fair. We're also, offering in any way that we can help HR, knowing that they're very, very extremely busy at this point. We also continue our partnership with Forward Madison around the accelerated licensure in special education program at UW-Madison. And I know that Jen is here, and I believe it's on the agenda for her to provide some additional specific updates around those numbers. And then we have financial support for provisionally licensed teachers through student services. It's called our Student Services Grow Our Own program. I'm personally continuing to support that program. I did that in my prior role as the assistant director of student services for the high schools. So I have some background in teacher education. And so it's been really nice for me to help support our provisionally licensed teachers through both ALSI and Grow Our Own to get some financial support with their teacher preparation. All right, so I'm just gonna give you some brief information about our performance measures for the year. And I'm gonna start out with how we grounded our staff in what we need to do. Next slide. So we have had multiple sources of quantitative and qualitative data over a number of years, and including the results from an outside evaluation by a company called West Ed. And those have been synthesized to develop this set of critical quality measures to facilitate change. So I know that Dr. Jenkins and I had a chance to speak earlier today, and we are going to get out to the board. Dr. Jenkins will get to all of you a copy of the executive summary very soon. We just have to take the information that we have and put it into a format that can be sent to you. And then the full report is quite lengthy, but the executive summary will be a great place to start if you haven't seen that yet. Next slide. So this is a statement that we've provided to all of our special education staff across the district. And I'll give you just a moment to read through that rather than reading to you. Next slide, Barb. All right, so some of these performance measures in special education are also represented in the district's school improvement plans for each of our buildings. So on-time IEPs, on-time evaluations, and on-time progress reports. We're really stressing for staff that includes not only having them completed, but also sent to parents. Also wanted to let the board know that for those of you who are familiar, every 5 years, we go through a cycle of procedural compliance with DPI. So this year is our phase 1, which means that we're going to need to provide information to DPI about our disproportionality of students of color in special education. We're also going to need to provide information about our on-time evaluations. And then next year, there will be a more in-depth review of more information. Next slide. So this slide represents what I would consider to be our most critical work of this year and beyond, which is IEPs that are high quality and anti-racist. So what we want to see is more strengths-based IEPs that emphasize what a scholar needs to learn and clearly describes how educators will facilitate that learning. So in other words, we don't want to see IEPs that describe what's wrong with a scholar. The point of an IEP is what we're going to do on the school side to support the scholar to break down barriers and achieve grade level standards. We also want IEPs that are intentionally written to be anti-racist. We have had a work group for about a year now developing a rubric. And so that work group has consisted of staff in various positions in special education across the district, several of whom are African-American, and also a scholar from UW-Madison. Her name is Dr. Ashley White. She has studied this extensively. She also identifies as an African-American woman. So that is the group that created a rubric that we are going to be asking our program support teachers and our special ed teachers to use starting this year. Now, while we don't want to pile on more work, this is absolutely critical, and we have expressed that it's really not extra work, it's doing our work differently. IEPs have to be written. We want them to be written in an anti-racist manner. We also are going to be looking at whether or not all of our IEPs are implemented as written. That's something that DPI looks at consistently in the procedural self-compliance reviews. And also anytime we get a complaint, this is the number one question, is was the scholar's IEP being implemented as written? Now, number 4 is aligned with number 3, when a scholar is not making sufficient progress. So if the progress reports that are done quarterly for a scholar indicate that they're not making the progress that we would like to see toward the general education curriculum and annual IEP goals, then we've set forth an expectation that the IEP team will meet to revise the IEP to determine what needs to be done differently to support greater success. Next slide. So here's a place where we're going to be asking each of our schools, it will be the program support teacher, assistant director, or special ed coordinator, and the principal looking at targets in the following areas and paying particular attention to the data for our African-American scholars and scholars who are English language learners. This again is aligned with school improvement plans at each of our buildings. So we want to increase the time that our scholars are in the general education environment. For those of you who don't have a special education background, in IEPs, we have to identify for each service whether that service is being provided in the general education classroom or special education. A special education environment means that there aren't any other scholars, or there aren't any scholars in the room who do not have an identified disability. So we want our scholars to be in the general education environment more. We want fewer of our scholars to be on a shortened day schedule. We want to increase the number of scholars who are participating in state and district-wide assessments, increase the number who score proficient in grade level standards, reduce the number of scholars who receive behavior referrals, including seclusion and restraint, and we want to reduce overrepresentation in special education. These categories that I've listed here, I'm sorry for the alphabet soup, but these are the areas in which we are identified by the Department of Public Instruction as being disproportionate: emotional behavioral disability, intellectual disability, specific learning disability, and other health impairment. Next slide. And I'm about to wrap up, so hopefully I haven't run too long. We did have our meeting of the Family and Parent Advisory Council last week. We had a great showing. This year, we will be meeting monthly rather than less frequently. And we're offering 2 times a month so that to try to accommodate more schedules for more family members to be able to attend. There's a survey that's still out right now just to gather information from families about when will be a good time to meet and what topics they want to cover. But right now it's looking like we'll have a morning and an evening meeting once every month with the Parent and Family Advisory Council. Also wanted you to know that we have 2 pilots happening in our elementary schools to try to improve the practices for our learners who identify as being neurodiverse. Many of them in special education lingo are identified as having autism, but we have brought the PINE program, which is out of New York University and has a great reputation. Some of our parents of scholars in our district asked us to take a look at that. So we have that pilot that is operating at Randall and Franklin elementary schools. And then we've also brought in some specific coaching through CISA 2 for 3 of our elementary schools, Lapham, Schenck, and Mendota. And what we're going to do is we've put out a survey to teachers. We're going to do a pre and post survey and also look at all the data points that I just described. We're going to look at those now and then at the end of the year, because we want to determine where we get the best outcomes for our money across the district. So we're running these pilots, and then at the end of the year, we'll have more information about what was the most beneficial to our teachers and school staff, as well as our scholars. All right, so that's it for special education updates for the moment. I'm happy to take questions and answer any that I can.
Thank you, Dr. Nancy, for that. First hand I saw earlier was Board Member Vandermeulen. Go ahead and ask your question.
Some are questions, some are comments, but 1, thank you for the presentation. It was excellent. 2, I'm very excited on the PINE program. I've been following it and working with some of the parents who are involved with it, and I think it could really show some promising results. Little worried on the on cutting down the numbers on OHI or other health impairment, mainly because I'm afraid that individuals with Asperger's and ADHD who happen to be doing well in the classroom, especially females, will end up losing services because they won't be seen as needing as much help, because we want to reduce that number. And I'm a little nervous on that. And my last one is the best way, and there are many ways to do anti-racist IEPs, and I'm also thrilled on the getting rid of the shortened day. But there are many ways to do anti-racist IEPs, but I think one of the best ways is to please have the IEPs translated into the native language of the parent. It almost immediately, because right now we have parents who are waiting months to understand what services their child could get. And by the time they understand what the document says, because we haven't provided it, it's too late to do those services. I think that's really a very easy fix to a problem, because you can't fix something if you can't understand why it's there. And I think this could really be resolved. So that's my comments.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. You've raised something that I need to check on, Board Member Vandermeulen, which is I'm going to check this week on what our time frame is currently for having IEPs translated and then to parents. So I have heard that there have been delays. I know in my work at the high schools, we were very intentional about always having a BRS available to at least talk it through, but the written document itself, I don't know what our turnaround time is, and I'm going to check on that. So thank you for raising that. I also appreciate the concerns about the overrepresentation. And I think, over the course of my career, I've been in many conversations about this and the debate about we don't want to deny anyone services who qualifies for those services, but our numbers don't lie. And our numbers tell me that somehow we are referring and qualifying more students of color, and particularly African-American students, and particularly African-American male students, than should be qualified. There's no race should be overrepresented in any disability category. And so I feel very strongly that people can make the argument that, of course, we don't want to deny services. But for me, I think if our education system is failing students and that's why they're qualifying, that doesn't a disability make. So I think this also is strongly connected with the letters, training for our staff, and then the desire to really lean in on reading ability and comprehension for our scholars at a young age, because I think that's where we wind up with students being referred in the middle school and high school years because the education system has failed them. And I really don't want to sound like I'm saying that our district is bad. It's not. We have amazing teachers and many wonderful things happen. And as I had on one of my slides, many of our scholars with an IEP have great outcomes, but for the ones who don't, and we look at those overrepresentation numbers and how they're connected, and we need to make some changes because it's not okay. So, but I appreciate your comment about we don't want to deny services.
Actually, there's one clarification on that. I agree it's overrepresented in EBD and Black males. No, I'm just talking about OHI and response to females. That's the only area I'm worried on overrepresentation. The others have been clearly shown that there's overrepresentation. What I'm worried about is specific on OHI and gender.
Thank you. I will also take a look, I'll disaggregate the data, take a look at that. So thank you for highlighting that.
Thank you for that question, Board Member Vandermeulen. Board Member Castro.
Thank you so much for speaking to this entire presentation, and especially for the part on the overrepresentation of Black students and the shortened day schedule. I think looking into the future, I would love for us to have an expansive conversation on how we can make our classrooms more accessible and inclusive for students who are neurodivergent or have dyslexia or have dyslexia. I think, as you alluded to, a lot of the IEPs or disabilities we have in the district are human-made because of maybe bias and discrimination in the system, particularly Black students who are labeled with behavioral disabilities. And so really investigating that phenomenon in the district is something that I hope this body takes up in the future.
Absolutely. Yep, I agree. I think through our anti-racist IEP work, the rubric that was developed, I believe is a good next step for our district in digging down to the root causes. I think that it's going to push our educators to look at what they write and then how they think and treat our scholars. But there is more, most certainly, in terms of digging to root causes.
Yeah, and especially on the perception of behavior and tagging someone with behavioral disabilities. It's related to our BEP and how we treat, and our practices with in-school and out-of-school suspensions too. So thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Castro. Board Member Carusi.
Thank you. I really appreciate this presentation. Thank you so much for answering many of my questions about where we're at in terms of the WestEd evaluation and planning for special education. Our last special education plan, I believe, was passed at the end of 2016, and it was a 3-year plan. So we're now 5 years out and we don't have another plan. And I really love the informal plan you just outlined for us. I think it really gets at many of our priorities in terms of moving forward as an anti-racist district. And I'm wondering what the plan is to formalize that into a special education plan with, we used to get annual monitoring updates where they took the specific goals in the plan and we got like metrics and, also some qualitative reporting on progress we've made in each of those areas. And I'm hopeful that we're looking at doing some planning like that again as we move forward. I wondered if you could just comment on the plans for making a special education plan for the next 3 to 5 years. And also related to that, can the board get the full evaluation from WestEd?
Yes, so what I created over the last few weeks was a special education implementation guide for staff that's a more formal document than what I shared in my slides, but it includes all of those components. And then it also includes resources that staff will use to implement the guide. And then we do absolutely, though, need to take a look at the the prior special ed plan that was developed and include some additional components beyond just that implementation guide. I wanted to start there because I wanted to get us started right away at the beginning of the school year. So thank you for asking that question. So it's definitely on the list. And yes, the full report is available, and I'm going to just work with Dr. Jenkins and anyone else that he would like me to in order to, however he wants to work to get that to you, the executive summary as well as the full report. So we will most certainly work on that. Thank you.
And then
I
had one more quick thing, and that was, I can't remember it. I think we budgeted for an ombuds position for special education in our draft preliminary budget. Where are we at in terms of hiring that position?
I know we have several candidates. And so that was something that Dr. Jenkins and I talked briefly about today, is our next steps for taking a look at the candidates, that the people who have applied, and then how we're going to move forward on that hiring.
Go ahead, Dr. Jenkins.
Yeah, the previous question first, in terms of the plan, let me just say Dr. Mofenter has come in this short period of time and really have made an assessment of where we've been, and kind of like talking in terms of where we're going to go with the overall academic plan. And you can't have an academic plan without including students who are receiving services. So there's an assessment being made. We're taking the West Ed evaluation that we received in last year, and considering all the things of where we were and where we kind of are and where we kind of need to go, we're going to come out with the full academic plan. This Friday, you will receive, as you previously mentioned, the executive summary. And then there's going to be a formal presentation as we go through and interrogate the audit itself in terms of what came back to us, and then what things we've learned now. And as we're trying to take into account of where we're trying to move all together with the academic plan. So that full presentation will be coming to you after we've had that opportunity, but you will receive the executive summary this Friday as well. And you will get the full report even prior to us doing the presentation, but we wanted to make sure we go through it together and work through it as a team, give it to you, and then do some of our briefing, but we will hope to come back in an instructional meeting when we talk about the full academic plan somewhere around January or February to go through the whole plan with you. And then also I wanted to look, if you heard Dr. Mofenter also mentioning the fact of letters, when we talk about special ed and we talk about students receiving the services, there's also a direct intersection between African-American male students not reading well. And when you talk about the African-American male students, and you also talking about students with dyslexia, and letters itself helps us address that. And that is an anti-racist strategy, because we want to bring students who are receiving services as well on par with their peers as well. But there's even disparities between students with IEPs in terms of their level 2 of reading. So I just wanted to highlight that and thank Dr. Mofenter for bringing it out. But she's been very astute about a number of things that we have to work on together. And I'm looking forward to continue to work with her too this year.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins. Does that answer your question, Board Member Carusi? I think. Okay. Board Member Gomes-Schmidt. Oh.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for this presentation. I appreciate it. My questions have sort of been covered. They were also around the evaluation process and the timeline that was on that from doing the evaluation until June of 2020. It was a pretty extensive evaluation that covered a lot of pieces. I know it got delayed due to COVID. Were there certain ways or certain pieces we weren't able to do due to COVID? And I guess as this sort of guides our work going forward, the way backing up to what I think the board role is, the way the board used to operate is that, you know, there would be an evaluation And then out of that evaluation, a new plan specifically for special education would be developed and then discussed with the community and passed by the board. So I guess my question for us as a board and for Dr. Jenkins is, are we changing that process? Is it all going to be absorbed into something else? Because I would hate to lose sight of these specific pieces along the way.
No, let
I
me
guess it's
just,
a process question.
no, as stated earlier, and you had mentioned about involving the community, just like we were talking about the curriculum adoption, we're going to continue with that process. That I think that's the best way for us to move as a district. I think that was a good process. Did it all happen the way that we thought it was going to happen? No, and I think it's not to even blame it on COVID, because it was prior to COVID when I was just looking at some of the things that were lifted in previous evaluations that had not made it to the point of implementation. But I did look at the fact beyond I'm talking about 5 years back, because I wanted to climb back and see what was happening consistently. And there was no evidence that those previous audits, the recommendations were being implemented across the board. But we're still in that observation and measuring phase right now. And we're beginning to set the standards. So knowing COVID hit 18 months ago, Dr. Morfenta came in, the first thing she did is begin to make an assessment, even though the West Ed had been completed last spring. There were some things in there that we even had conversations as early as today that we want to look at still being able to do. That's why I say we want to analyze it, but trust that we're going to have everyone involved in this. This is a partnership. We can't do something with the administration without having the board and without having our teachers, having our community, and lifting students' voices in this as well. But it's an overall large plan that I've had prior conversations just mentioning to you, Ms. Gomez-Smith. No, we won't abandon the part of having community, because we have to have the communities in the schools and the schools in the community.
Thanks. And I appreciate those checkpoints and those feedback loops to the boards so that we can, problem solve with you collaboratively on how to move this forward. This really important work. I guess I just have one quick comment and then one more question. For the service aligned best practices and equity standards, I guess that slide, that was the A to G, or the lettered one. That's a lot of numbers of students, like trying to increase numbers or decrease numbers in different areas. Is there a way to round out to really understand how students are experiencing the services that they receive and add that to that list? I don't know how. I don't.
Yeah, no, it's a very, very good question. And I guess my first thought is that would be something that would go into the multi-year plan. But as we ask our buildings, which to my knowledge, this has not been the case before. So all of those data points are things that I think the board has asked about, community has asked about, we've had on our radar, but to my knowledge, we haven't asked buildings to look at their data on a regular basis. We've looked at it district-wide, and you can't determine kind of root causes or where specific kinds of targeted improvements need to happen if you don't look at data by building. We have 52 buildings, right? And so I think that, to me, and I guess I don't want to make presumptions, but on the other hand, I've been at enough IEP team meetings that I know that if an IEP team is talking about a student being on a shortened day, that scholar and their family are both feeling like they're being pushed out. If our scholars are being asked to go to intensive intervention programs and not be in their school buildings, then they're feeling like they're being pushed out. And so I think it's a fabulous idea and point. And I think we could do a better job with not only our post-IEP family surveys, but also really hearing more scholar voice. We don't have enough scholars attending their own IEP meetings, in my opinion. And so we need to, I think that's one way we can think about it. But I also think those data points are very highly likely directly correlated with how a scholar feels about their experiences in our schools and their special education services. So, but I really appreciate your point about asking people and not just making assumptions about that. being in general education classes. I feel like, any scholar who's not in general education classes most of the time probably feels somewhat disenfranchised. So I think those data points are probably among some of the right ones, but it's a good question to follow up on.
Thank you. And then my last question is a really big question, so you probably can't answer this tonight, but I'm just curious, what do you see as the biggest barriers to effectively developing and implementing IEPs? Like what is the leverage point? Is there something specific we're missing? Does it depend on the school? Like, what do we need to really grapple with? Or what are you really grappling with, I guess?
Sure, you're right. It's a very big question. So my gut feeling from spending time over many years with special educators and being one myself is that too much of the time, what gets written in an IEP is somewhat removed from or not clearly doesn't clearly outline and explain what the scholar really needs to be successful. That IEP teams get into all these conversations and people have different opinions. And sometimes it's really hard for that team to boil down to the things that are really going to make the difference for that scholar in their learning and social and emotional growth and whatever the disability related needs are for that scholar. So then the people who are responsible for implementation walk away from that meeting and they're not really clear about what they need to do. So trying to synthesize that in a way, and it's a lot of professional learning that needs to happen, but personally, I've come to know that it's not making it more simple, not overcomplicating, so that I know as a teacher, these are the 15 minutes a day I'm going to spend with the scholar, and these are the reading strategies I'm going to use, and this is the progress monitoring tool I'm going to use. And I want teachers to walk away from IPT meetings with more of that in their head and being able to put it down on paper and implement it. I think it's a barrier of people want to do the right thing. They want to do their jobs well, and they can't if they don't know what to do. So I think we need to help them as leaders in the district to understand what to do. We assume that special educators can figure it all out on their own. I think they just need some support. It's kind of been my experience. So hopefully I described that reasonably well.
No, thank you very much for your answer. I appreciate it. And thanks for all the work that you're doing too in the department. Appreciate it.
Yeah,
you're very welcome.
I'm sorry, I have to add that and frankly, having supervised for 28 years, special ed services, for me, a consistent thing I think I've seen across 5 different states across the country is what James Baldwin said, the will to love our children. That's bottom line. And it's the humanization that needs to take place. I think all of those things, what you said, Dr. Mofenter, they're there, but it's that last part of human decency. And I think sometimes we run into, do we love our children enough to engage them if they're nonverbal, if they're verbal, and if we can decenter just behavior and put it upon what do we want to have a quality human experience for everyone. So, and I've found that to be consistent across the board. And yes, those things Dr. Mofenter said, but I think when we bring love to the table first, just human decency, then things I've seen in IEPs just really have some amazing experiences for the children and for their families. Because we also, in IEPs, though the family is supposed to be there, when you have those families who don't have the level of advocacy, it's even another level of experience for that child. And when you're talking about the children, particularly the ones, African-American males, do we see that child? When we see a Latinx child, when we see a Native child, when we see the children, can we see them? And when you do that, I think all the other things just fall in place. It becomes a lot easier. And I've seen that for a long time in my 30 plus year, but specifically supervising for 28 years. We have to be able to see the child.
Thank you for saying that. I do think, at the end of the day, the IEP process for a family and for a child is only as good as its team. So if you have a very comprehensive team who really, like you said, sees the child as a child who is capable of learning, and there's empathy and humanity in that piece, that process automatically comes to fruition to have a good process. So I think that's important to state. Okay, board member Marilli, go ahead.
I think board member Mojo had her hand up. So go ahead, Ellie.
Sorry, board president Mildred, go ahead.
Thank you. I have to mute the room before I talk, so if Ananda wants to go, I'll set that up.
All right. Thank you so much for this presentation, Nancy. I have a quick question that didn't come up yet. Was in this process of what I'm understanding, both in alignment with the rubric around anti-racist IEPs and the language and reviewing the IEPs, is part of that work also looking at where the disproportionate number of referrals are coming from, which staff is being challenged with a more anti-racist language, which staff is being challenging with finding alternatives to shorten days. And what, if yes, if that's part of the data collection, what are some of the strategies that you're thinking about implementing with those staff?
Yes. So I will say that Dr. Ashley White has been incredibly helpful to me because I've been telling people that I've been in the district. This is my 4th year, and I had some pent up demand for wanting to move things forward more quickly. And so Dr. White was really helpful to me in thinking about the fact that we are rolling out an anti-racist IEP rubric and criteria. And I really wanted to dive into looking at that evaluation data, that referral and evaluation data, who's referring and then who's qualifying. And so she has met with me multiple times and just said that starting with the data around reflection to write anti-racist IEPs is a really good starting point. And then we want to move into looking at evaluations and what that data looks like in terms of referral and evaluation outcomes next year. But we will start to look at it through this process. Because as teachers reflect on how they're writing and reflect on what they're changing in those IEPs, some of that work will be done with initial IEPs. And so that's going to be our sort of entry point into which scholars are being newly qualified for special education services. And that'll give us a set of data that we can work from. And then in terms of implementing, working with our educators, we just recently brought Nakaya Wiley into the department. And so she's going to be one of our key staff supports for staff, and also connecting with families around our anti-racist IEP work, because families are going to be a really critical part of the work. We've started to share out, and I've messaged personally multiple times that it's we're doing the work using the rubric, but then what really matters is whether or not the scholar themselves and the family members look at that IEP and say that it's anti-racist. And so Nakaya is going to be helping to connect with families, and then Dr. White will also be helping. We have a contract with her to help provide some professional learning to our special education staff. So that's what we have planned so far, and we're definitely open to more ideas. We'd love to get more, any of you who have ideas for us, please let me know. I'm happy to have conversations or take down ideas from you.
Oh, thank you so much. I think sorry, Dr. Jenkins, were you going to add anything?
I was just going to say, Ms. Wiley, I think it's going to be a phenomenal hire for us. Thank you so much, Dr. Mofenter. And she has brought, day one, me coming here is.
Oh, well, we lost Dr. Jenkins. Oh.
Okay, try again, Dr. Jenkins, see if you can mute yourself. We can't hear you.
Are you there now?
Okay. Yep.
Okay. My camera was flicking on and off earlier. I don't know. But no, I was just saying that she was an excellent hire. She's been bringing ideas to the table since I first arrived. And I was just really happy to see that you promoted her within the department. And when you're talking about being anti-racist, not only just her perspective coming in from Chicago, having some different thoughts, but having been here in the district, I think she's going to be a great support for us.
Yeah, Nancy, thank you so much. I think your strategies are right on point. You have your work cut out for you. I think the last thing is just a comment, and because you invited us to to give that feedback. One of the things that President Muldrow and Vice President Castro keeps reminding us at every meeting is that this is a community meeting, right? This is a meeting for our parents, and unfortunately, one of the areas most mystified and cumbersome and, full of jargons and full of barriers is special education. And it is a place that if you don't speak that language, parents and young people often don't even understand what's happening to them, even when nothing is happening to them. I think it just, I'm looking forward to see your vision and how you continue to do this work, because I know that you know really well what I'm speaking to. So I really appreciate your work. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for that reminder too. I had the parent and family special education council meeting last week stopped me in the middle and said, stop, please, can you please stop using acronyms? And I always have to apologize because they just roll off my tongue after 30 something years. So thank you.
Thank you, Board Member Morelli, Board President Muldrow.
Thank you so much, Chair Pearson. I want to speak to specifically our students who are hearing impaired and our students who are visually impaired. And I also want to just chime in and say that when we talk about disproportionality, we do oversimplify the experience of our Black students. Our Black students are overrepresented in specific areas and underrepresented in other areas, meaning there's a series of delayed diagnosis that then become, students. I worked with a student who was told for years that he talked too loud in class. And he was told that for years before he was told he was hearing impaired, right? So we assign value to certain students' character and overlook significant disabilities in certain young people. And so I think we have to have an expansive conversation around disproportionality. That being said, we just talked about the science of reading and phonics. And when we talk about the science of reading and phonics, it's, as far as I know, not an approach to teaching reading that necessarily extends itself to students who are learning to read in Braille or students who are hearing impaired. Can you speak to that work?
Sure. So, I mean, we do have in Madison, and I think many of you may know this already, but in Madison, we pride ourselves in providing excellent services for our scholars who are identified as having being deaf and hard of hearing or visually impaired. However, I will say that while we are seen as a district who's leading in this area, we also have those services concentrated. And so that is something I think, and I don't know, Board Member Muldrow, if that's one of the things that you had in mind in your question, but it's something that I have in mind is that they're concentrated in certain places. And so our scholars who have those low incidence disabilities are often steered to attending certain schools to get excellent services. And so that takes them, in some cases, pretty far away from their home schools and out of their home communities. We also do have scholars in our district who wind up going to the school for the deaf and the school for the blind and visually impaired. Then they're out of their home communities and out of their homes. So I think there's more work to do there in terms of improving the excellence of the educational services that we provide. But we do have a number of vision teachers, deaf and hard of hearing teachers, and sign language interpreters who work for the district. And not all districts offer that level of service in the district. So I think we have some things to celebrate and other pieces of those services that we need to continue to look at in terms of quality of life for our scholars and their families. Did that answer the question, or was there more to the question that I didn't quite hit upon?
I think that you spoke to the question. However, I think talking about disproportionality in those areas and disproportionality in terms of, you know, disabilities that require diagnosis and who is more likely to be diagnosed earlier on is relevant to the conversation we're having. And I think, yeah, I'm going to stop there.
Nope. Yes, that makes sense. And I think, to your point, right, when we analyze data to determine disproportionality, and when DPI does that, underrepresentation is typically left out of that conversation. And so in those two areas, we haven't a history of overrepresentation, but we haven't looked at the data closely enough to know if we have underrepresentation.
Thank you, Board President Miljo, for that question. Board Member Vandermeulen, you have something quick to say?
Yes. I want to uplift what President Muldrow just stated. La Follette has one of the best programs for the deaf that is unheard of in the majority of the state and the majority of areas, because we don't do enough to showcase that and their abilities and their ways of helping students. And I think that's a misstep that we often don't use what's in our own district, one. But number two, I'm hoping, again, I may be naive, I'm hoping that 4K and the expansion and creation of 4K all day will increase the number of early diagnoses. I cannot speak on deaf and hard of hearing. I can speak on autism, on the fact that the average white child is diagnosed at 18 months. The average Black or Hispanic child is diagnosed at 5 years. And I'm hoping that 4K and even 3K can turn this trend and make it so that this separation on race does not continue.
Thank you for that comment, Board Member Vandermeulen. Okay. Any other questions or comments that members would like to say before we move on? Okay, seeing none. We bring up. Okay, our next portion is the use of restraint and seclusion. And we have a presentation done by Brian Holmquist and Dr. Nancy.
Two big ones.
So restraint and seclusion, and then what else?
Two policies.
Oh, that's right.
All right, thank you. I will get us started and then turn it over to Brian after the first few slides. So next slide, Barb. And I spoke to this just a few moments ago. So if it's all right with everyone, we will skip to slide number 4. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about current requirements and data, and then next steps. Next slide. So something that Brian was gracious enough to present at the Student Services Department meeting recently. We will continue to have him and include this information in all of our large and small group meetings. We want staff to understand that restraint and seclusion are prohibited unless a scholar's behavior presents a clear, present, and imminent risk to the physical safety of the scholar or others, and it's determined through obviously what sometimes has to be a quick assessment as being the least restrictive intervention feasible. So in other words, we don't want to use restraint and seclusion. Restraint, scholars must not be put in a prone position. Brian is going to speak to our training in a little bit that addresses the use of restraint safely for our scholars. And then for seclusion, when our scholars need a break in a separate area, the door connecting the room or area in which the scholar is located cannot be capable of being locked or have a lock on it. Next slide. It's considered one incident if immediately following the use of restraint or seclusion, the scholar's behavior does present a clear, present, and imminent risk to physical safety, or the restraint or seclusion happens a second time, subsequent. And the scholar, if there's a second incident that does not immediately follow the first, then it is considered to be more than one incident. And this is important. I think you all have gotten this information not too long ago. So Barb, I'm actually wondering if we have the right version of the slides, because the most recent version of the slides had these taken out. And we can skip over slides, but where this is important is that we added some clarifying information to the data slides, Barb, in the most recent version that I sent you.
Take a look, Nancy.
Okay, that would be great. Thank you.
Board doc has the updated one for sure.
Yeah.
Thank you. So if okay, I was gonna say, in the name of time, we could use those and then you have the most recent ones in front of you, but I just want to make sure the descriptions of our data are clear.
Yep, Barb, that's the right one, I believe.
Thank you very much.
The right slide.
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
You got it. Thank you. All right, you can go on to the data slides. All right, so a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So when we look at this is the total number of incidents of restraint and or seclusion over the past 4 years. So really, we know that because of the pandemic and primary environment for learning being virtual since from March of 2020 through the end of last school year, that the last 2 years are probably not data that we would want to compare to prior years. But we can say that even before 2017-18, we've had a pretty good trend line going that we want to continue. Now, when we look at the specifics within that, we can see the restraint only, seclusion only, and then both restraint and seclusion, and then the yellow being the grand total, which neither is better or worse than the other. But I will say that as a special educator, I do know that I'm regularly in schools where scholars take a break. And one of the things that I know Brian's been working hard to tighten up is when we identify an incident as being a seclusion. So sometimes scholars will take a break, and I think we're still doing some work tightening up when people count that and don't count that. We want to make sure our data is good. All right, next slide. The next 2 slides are harder to see for me, and I think all of us. Barb, can you scroll down for us? There we go. All right, so the one just prior to this one, Barb, is the disability. So Why this is hard, because when we look at the blue line compared to the orange line, the blue line indicates the number of scholars who have experienced a restraint or seclusion. Blue is scholars who have an identified disability, and orange is no disability. Too many for all of our scholars in general, but the blue lines everywhere are higher than the orange lines. So we know that we have some work to do to train staff on supporting our scholars not to get to the point of being secluded or restrained. And we'll speak to that a little bit more in a minute. And then the next slide, also very hard to see, which is that when we look at our seclusion and restraint numbers by race, this data is representing risk ratio, which means the number of times more likely scholars of color are to be involved in an incident of restraint or seclusion than white peers. So this essentially risk ratios are calculated as disproportionality for students of color by definition. So we see that for our Black or African American scholars, that's the gray line, it's the tallest, which is what we do not want to see. And so we know that we have some significant work to do in this area across the district. Students who identify as being multiracial also have a fairly high risk ratio, along with our Hispanic or Latino scholars, not as great a risk ratio, but yet a risk ratio nonetheless. So what are our next steps? So one of our primary next steps is to improve data literacy among staff and increase data reviews by school, so that principals and other leaders in buildings can actually take a look at what their data looks like disaggregated by disability and race. We also need to partner more strongly with families to ensure that we're conducting functional behavior analysis that is rigorous, for lack of a better word, but that really asks what's going on with the scholar and gets family input into what's happening for that scholar, so that we can develop individualized positive behavior support plans and have a goal for each scholar to prevent the use of restraint and seclusion by using other more positive methods. We also need to improve the use of proactive school-wide tier 1 interventions and make those more consistent and include social and emotional learning instruction. We know that our teachers, some teachers do this on a daily basis with scholars. Others still want some support in knowing how to do that and what to do. So we feel like we can do a much better job by thinking about what targeted tier 1 interventions we can use and teach staff to use and work individually with students. We want to reduce the use of these more restrictive measures of restraint and seclusion. Next slide. I'm going to turn it over to Brian.
Yeah, good evening, everybody. Can you guys hear me fine?
Yeah.
Okay. So many of you guys are aware of our training on nonviolent crisis intervention, which is overall training, and it's designed to assist our staff on learning how to effectively, proactively prevent emotional and behavioral escalation, as well as assist when someone has already escalated to be able to help de-escalate those situations. This training is unique in the way that we're providing it in a model that's a blended model of some self-paced online portions that partner up with some in-person training. And there should be a huge asterisk right here that indicates that over the past 18 months, as you can tell, the self-paced online we've been able to continue with. However, that in-person training has been something that's been put on pause and been sitting in our stacks off to the side, trying to figure out how do we catch up. And my next slide will kind of get to some of those training details. And then we're doing our training on the 2-year cycle, which is pretty consistent. One of the reasons why we've picked with nonviolent crisis intervention training is the portability. Earlier during some of the letters training, I know you guys were all discussing about, hey, the level of investment that we have in staff, what happens when they leave, what happens when we have new staff that comes. What's unique about MVCI training is the portability. So if we have staff that are coming from a different district, they might be coming from a school model where some of that training was provided, or we're providing some of that training when they go to another district. They have the portability of that training throughout the districts, and pretty much every district in the state of Wisconsin is in alignment with nonviolent crisis intervention. Here's our scope of our training. Where we look at our job role categories, and we look at who do we think that is at the most likelihood of ending up in situations with individuals that are in crisis or escalation, and how they might need some response to that. We have about 1,500 staff that fall into that category. Currently, we have about 1,200 staff that are currently trained. However, that big asterisk that I just talked about of the last 18 months, that's where we have about 700 people that are in need of the in-person portion, where they're sitting off to the side, where we need to catch up with them. We provided that blended online portion, and we both provided a virtual option, but we need to catch up with that in-person physical training portion of it. And then we have about 300 staff that are in roles that are not required for training. However, either their individual school, when we worked with them, or those individuals themselves really indicated that we wanted to have that training available for them. So we've provided that as well. There's another about 800 staff that we've trained through MSCR, student teachers, some of our partnering programs, some of our community partners that we've trained over the year, or the past couple of years as well. Oftentimes people are asking, like, where are we at right now for staff that need in the initial training this year? And we're at about 600 staff. That's quite a heavy lift, as you can tell. And we are working individually with every building administrator and their PST to analyze their staffing mix within their building to figure out who needs what kind of training. Everything from catch-up recertification or initial from this past 18 months to new staff that need initial training, to staff that are due for a recertification upcoming. And so we're doing that with each school individually and developing a plan from there. And that may be the last slide I have for you.
Thank you. Any comments or questions? Board Member Vandermeulen, and if we can try to keep the conversation as succinct as possible, just so that we still have a couple items left on the agenda for tonight.
I understand. Having worked on this for 17 years, I'm glad it's being finally taken care of. On the 300 staff that are come in contact, my only, and don't need the training. I understand that. I understand the reasons for it. The problem being is when a child has a meltdown, they don't choose who they happen to be around and who happens to see it. Some of the worst injuries on the use of seclusion restraint are people who weren't trained, including janitors, including in other staff members in buildings who didn't have experience with children. And they're the ones who did it wrong and kids died. And so I worry about that, and that's my only comment.
Yeah,
absolutely.
I didn't hear you, Mai.
No, I was just saying thank you for that question, or for that comment, sorry. Brian, were you going to say something? I'm sorry, I couldn't.
Yeah, I can respond a little bit. And this has to do with, so our full training for nonviolent crisis intervention, as I talked about earlier, has a blended online component, an in-person component. That in-person component can kind of even be teased out two smaller sections. One is a component that is really reinforcing the proactive and the verbal de-escalation skills. And then that last component is really the physical disengagement. And then finally, the physical holding skills. And, you know, ideally, I try my best to separate out seclusion and restraint from MVCI. And the reason being is I want people to see nonviolent crisis intervention as a training that equips people with the skills and the knowledge around how to intervene with people early on how to support them when they're in a place that's more adaptive, how to engage with people in a verbal de-escalation, and then how to disengage and not have to go to a physical holding skill. We know that is so impactful on the individual being held, as well as the people that are engaging in those physical restraints. And so that's where some of that training that we're talking about of how can we prioritize all of these individuals that we need to have this training, and how do we provide the proactive pieces without the physical components of it for all of our staff. And ideally, that is our goal. We want all of our staff to be able to be trained in this proactive portion of this, and not necessarily the physical components. And we're on our pathway there. We're kind of leaning forward in that direction. It's a challenge. It's a challenge.
Thank you, Brian, for your response. I saw President Mildrell's hand kind of raised. Do you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, so I just want to clarify, you said we are advocating that students not be restrained in the prone position, meaning on their stomachs. Are we advocating that students, when physically restrained, be restrained in a supine position, meaning on their backs?
Yeah, good question. And so all of our restraints in the foundational course actually has no restraints
I'm
that.
so sorry, I can't hear
or
your
no.
answer. Okay, thank you.
Can you hear me now? Okay. So actually all of our training that we provide in the foundational course has no physical holds or restraints that involve any students on the ground at all. They're all upright. In some of our advanced technique strategies, these are when there's an individual request for some additional problem solving because either there's a student with some complex medical needs, or there are repeated incidents where students or staff are being hurt. That's where our team goes back out to help problem solve more specifically around that individual student's needs to determine what is the safest way to do that. Incorporating some of the advanced training. So our training team not only is trained to provide training in the foundational course, but also the advanced physical course, as well as autism and other developmental disabilities specific, and including some ongoing trauma-informed beyond the initial portion of that. So we've invested heavily in our training group to make sure that we're able to provide a very good foundational product and training for all of our staff that we can. And then when is it that we need to go in and provide some additional training because of very unique situations, rather than just like training everybody in that, because that's not appropriate. But you're correct, no prone, no supine, unless it's a very, very specific individual scenario, but prone is completely out.
My understanding is that the majority of our restraint and seclusion happens at the elementary level. Can you speak to what percentage of restraint and seclusion happens at the elementary school level versus the middle school and high school level? And can you explain why we're so much more likely to restrain our smaller and younger students?
Sharice, did you have something you were going to say first before I add mine?
I was, but there's a different question. So go ahead and address that question.
Yeah, year over year, our analysis would say that our most younger students, our elementary age students, are often involved in more physical restraints and seclusion than our middle and high school students. Our best kind of understanding of that data throughout the years has been many of our younger students are responding with a higher risk scenario in the sense of a risk or the decision-making matrix regarding the severity of something bad happening and the likelihood. So a younger student in their judgment in whatever situation they might be in is one of those factors that we're looking at if we need to intervene sooner than later, where some of our older students may not be presenting that same level of risk or around that decision-making matrix. Another piece of that has to do with, we have many of our students at our younger age that I think we have a less historical understanding of some of the antecedents or some of the different pieces that feed in to contributing to some of the escalation, not only from an environmental standpoint, but also from a staffing standpoint. We know that behavioral escalation is an integrated experience, meaning that I bring 50% to the table, right? So my interaction with the student and understanding what it is that's causing some additional kind of escalation, we learn that as we work with students over time. So those are a few of those pieces. We could definitely come back with some additional kind of data analysis around, like, why are we seeing highlights at certain particular grades? If I remember right, I think it was either second or third grade and fifth and eighth. Charisse might remember from some of our analysis that we did around suspension rates, actually, and behavioral referrals. And we overlay that with seclusion and restraint rates, and it almost mimicked each other. And so we saw that also kind of in alignment with the pattern for referral for special education, as well as all of those other pieces. They overlay on top of one another. If we could find the answers, we'd all be rich.
And I think that's important to note. I mean, oftentimes we think about these things in isolation. So like even our presentation tonight, Dr. Molfenter talked about special ed, and now we're talking about restraint and seclusion. But when we really are seeing these things play out with our students and our staff members in our schools, all of this is connected. And so, you know, I do appreciate the call to what type of restraints we're using. You know, the law is very clear on what we cannot do, but, you know, as MMSD, we take school student safety very important. It's very important to us. We take that very seriously. And so we have really implemented those types of restraints, if we have to use them, that would not put any compression, whether that's facing forward or facing on the back. I think it's also important for this last comment. We're talking a little bit about, you know, students' antecedents in regards to the younger students. One, it's very true that we learn more about the student, as we know this is all very individualized. So it's based upon that child's individual needs and our staff's ability to respond in a way that can help de-escalate and regulate the matter so that we do not have to use that last resort intervention. I think what will help in this regards is not only our training, but also our frequent data review and analyzing that data to help us better respond and identify the areas where there's the highest needs, and maybe even tailoring our training so that's more responsive to the students in those particular areas that we've identified. And that's something that we definitely want to, and we are going to focus on this upcoming year. We have the tools to really be able to identify these matters before they actually happen, which is important because we know that a student being restrained or secluded at a young age in school before their peers, that impacts how they feel in the school community. That impacts how their peers view them, right? We're talking about having a welcoming school. We have to create an environment that welcomes them, right? So that's like our job. And so we take that job very seriously, and Brian's team is very much so on it. You know, we look at the data quite frequently. In my past job, you know, looking at the intersection between behavior referrals, suspensions, and special education, restraint and seclusion, and referrals. I mean, all of that is intertwined. And so we need to attack this, not in isolation, but as a whole, in order to really reduce disproportionality for our students, particularly our Black students. I'll get off the soapbox now.
Thank you for your comments, Board President Miljo. Does that answer your question? Great, great. Okay. Dr. Jenkins, do you have something you'd like to say?
Yeah, I would just like to add for the board members to really take a close look at the book that we share with you, Anti-Racist Educational Leadership and Policy by Dr. A.J. Weldon. And this is a part of this discussion. And when we talk about color evasiveness, and I appreciate Attorney Perry bringing it up at the end, particularly when you started talking about African-American males. But the Clark experiment, I spoke to this once before at the board meeting, but it's this whole idea of back to seeing students, children as children. And we see within the educational system, 85% of our staffing being predominantly white at the elementary level, and then some of the suspensions and expulsions and those things derive when you start looking at just that whole conflict there within the school and the biological, physiological standpoint, the growth and development of our babies start taking on physical restraints, and others see them differently. So, but I just encourage board members to look at the anti-racist educational leadership and policy, and it talks about when we're setting policy, we need to really be conscious of how we go about it and make sure that we're not evading the conversation around color as well, race in general.
Thank you for your comments, Dr. Jenkins. Any other questions about this topic? Okay. And we are moving along then. If I can find where my board doc went. So the next portion of our night is policy updates and proposed action items for our October 25th regular Board of Education meeting. 9.1, reporting child abuse and neglect. And that will be presented by Gina. Dr. Jenkins, do you know if Gina? Oh,
yeah,
there
this
she is.
this is going to be Gina. Just before she starts, let me just say this really up front before we get into these two policies, and we know what we've all been dealing with in terms of in our district past couple of years, just around some policies. In particular, you talk about child neglect, which we talk about camera issues and things of this nature, and just really where we are as a district, making sure that we have the policies that can also protect our students at all costs. We know that we've done and been a part of various investigations that truly we probably could have done a little bit differently, have different, I don't know if the outcomes would have been different, but we probably could have done a different job. And I just can only take, I would take ownership as coming in as a superintendent, knowing that it's very important for us to take these policies very serious and make sure that we have the right policies in place to protect our children and our staff at all times. And so as we go through the child abuse and neglect, and then we're going to get to the policy around cameras, I wholeheartedly want us to work together to put forth the best policy possible and definitely make a strong stance of not having any hidden cameras up in any situation for our students or for our staff. These policies, when you start talking about child abuse and neglect, when you start talking about cameras, I take that very hard. And I think as a district, we need to make a clear stance that we're going to support in every kind of way possible our children and our staff. And I look forward to having these discussions on the policy. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I was under the impression that I was available to answer questions regarding the, if there was any questions. I don't know if I'm presenting on the policy. Sherry, is that accurate or?
Yes, Gina is actually our resident expert on this particular policy, which is why I asked her to come before the board tonight. Essentially what I did with this policy, as I have done in the past, is I made a couple changes, and I did note on the documents posted for the board that you actually received a copy that looked to be in final. It did not have the red lines. I will get that red line version to you so that you can see what actual changes were made, because there were some modifications made to the policy. I did take out the procedure, as I soon discovered that Ms. Aguglia has been updating an internal document for procedure in collaboration with both the Rape Crisis Center, the Dane County Child Protective Agency, and also with our internal Title IX coordinator, Eric Keston, who is no longer with the district. And so I do want to make sure that the board does have that document as well. And I did note that it was included along with a walkthrough on the process. And as Ms. Aguglia has indicated, she is here to answer any questions you might have, as it is her and her department that own this particular policy. I can speak to any legal questions you might have, but I will defer to Ms. Aguglia for any practice questions.
Thank you, Sherry, for that clarification. I was under the impression that there might be a presentation, but that's fine. Board Member Vandermeulen, go ahead.
Just a question. Sherry had listed the number of groups that Gina had worked with. Was our policy committee worked with as well? Did they get to work on this committee, on this document? And if that, could they in the future get these policies beforehand so that they could actually possibly get involved with the drafting?
So Nikki, you bring up a good point. I think we established a very aggressive schedule with the September policies that were brought before the board, plus the October policies. And it has made it a difficult task to get everything out well in advance of the board meetings. I do know that receiving documents the Friday before the board meeting is taxing on the board members, in that then they have a large number of documents to review. We do have a meeting set up with both board member Gomez-Schmidt and board member Castro to on October 8th to go over essentially all the policies that will be going before the board. If this board were so to decide that some of these policies needed to be put off for even a later time, the administration would be in support of that, as again, we do realize that we put forth a very aggressive policy, which makes getting documents out well in advance a difficult task at this point.
Thank you so much, Sherry. I really appreciate it.
Any other questions about this specific policy? Board Member Gomez-Schmidt.
Thank you, Chair Pearson. My question around this one is, in comparing the policy that's on board docs versus the one that was the one that was from 2016 to the one that was given to us for this meeting. Like you said, the procedures were taken out, and the document referenced is the one being used internally. I guess my question is that it seems like there's some difference in the procedure that's in the policy now versus the one that's in the internal document on the mandatory reporting. And one of the things that I was noticing looks different is just the one that is currently approved by the board talks about assistance should be sought from the principal and the social worker before doing a report. And it seems like the internal one that we've been working off is much more report as soon as you can. And so I'm just wondering if Gina could speak to the difference there. And then procedure-wise, I guess I would like to make sure that we don't take all of the procedure out on some of these, and make sure that we're referencing whatever documents are supporting the work of the policy in the policy so that people know where to find them. So I guess, Gina, that's the question about the difference between the current policy and what's in the mandatory reporting, as far as just like process wise.
Yeah, it's a great question. The process has relatively stayed the same, but as you can imagine, with all of the additional considerations that not only we as a school district that's really striving for more anti-racist practices, but also for the Dane County Department of Human Services and Child Protective Services, and us really working together to start to take a really good look at the fact that there's still an overrepresentation of our African-American families in the child protective system. And so we are really trying to deconstruct what that process looks like in a way that is truly anti-racist. And we know that when we are making abuse and neglect reports, there's always implicit bias involved. And that's something that we are, constantly working on with ourselves, with the individuals that we support and train in how to make reports and how to reach out for support. And this also connects very closely to the establishment of school-based critical response teams, where we really want to lift up and and really create opportunities for our school-based teams that know our students, that know our families really well, to be able to assess what is in the best interest of the student, not just does a report just need to be made. And we really want to shift that from, oh, we heard this, a report needs to be made, to what's happening. What relationship do we have with the student, with the family? What can we do to ensure the safety and the health of the student? And likely that, could also include a report. So we're really trying to make that intentional shift. So when you mentioned the shift from reported immediately to consult and then report, our language is that we do not want to consult to a consultation to delay a report. It cannot delay a report, but we do approve and recommend consulting when able. We don't want one person to get some information and just make a report. The more that one person can consult with their administrator, their school social worker, their school psychologist, other school staff, to figure out the situation, and does this really constitute as a mandatory report, or is this like a resource situation? Because a lot of times people make reports because they believe that students or families need resources, and that's not a child protection issue. While we want to make sure that we are creating lots of opportunities for our families to be connected to resources, we don't need to make a CPS report to do that. And so therefore, we're really trying to make sure families, or sorry, not families, and families, but staff understand what constitutes making a report, what's the process, and really why are we doing it? We're doing it because we believe that there is abuse or neglect happening by Wisconsin state statute. It doesn't mean that we, need this individual to, have, shoes, or, that we need them to go to sleep at night. Like, these are not things that we would be contacting CPS for. And therefore, I know those are very simple examples, but because of that, we really want any staff that gets information to consult with other staff in their building, like their administrator, like their student services staff, or their school social worker, before making a report. And again, obviously reports need to be made as quickly as possible. Consulting can't delay the report, but we really want to promote this idea of multidisciplinary teaming to really support the student in the situation.
Right. And I just want to say that I really appreciate the document that you have created that lays that all out, and it gives the examples within that document. What I'm wondering policy wise is if we can connect and not remove all of the procedure from here, but connect the statute part, which is our policy part, to your document, which obviously isn't appropriate to have all of that in our procedure or policy. But just wondering if we can either simplify our procedure part to make a crosswalk between what your document does for the actual function in the schools. And we can talk about that later. Sherry, what do you think on that?
I'm sure, as we've done, I think, in a couple other policies recently, we do reference the internal working documents and indicate where those documents are going to be located should people have questions. I do believe, Gina, that these documents are available somewhere on the website. And so it would just be a matter of figuring out where they are.
All right, thank you.
Sherry. Okay. Are those all the questions you had? For Member Gomes-Schmidt?
Yeah, that is. Thank you.
Thank you. Any others have questions regarding this policy update? No? Okay, seeing no hands, let's move on to 9.2 field trips.
Okay, for this one, essentially what we ended up doing was that we took the recommendations that were made to the board in an earlier instance and fleshed out where those recommendations fit. There were specific references to the forms that are associated with field trips, and that is where most of the changes occurred. We did change the term extracurricular to co-curricular to recognize that we're covering not just those things that would be considered extra, right? We're considering athletics, DECA, team events. And so we wanted to make sure that there was one policy that covered everything. Likewise, we did consolidate some of the forms. There were different forms for athletics. And while athletics is slightly different, we were able to modify so that we could reduce the number of forms include athletics on all of the within the regular documents for field trips. To that, I also want to take a moment to thank Dr. Monica Mitchell and Roxanne Amundson for their work specifically on the field trip policy and the accompanying internal forms. Roxanne Amundson is probably the person in the district that knows most about field trips, as she is the assistant in the chief of schools office who handles all of these forms and who receives complaints if things don't go as planned on field trips. And so I leaned on her heavily to assist us in reviewing and updating the forms. We do note that there are probably a couple places that do still need work. And specifically with regard to this policy, we would be perfectly okay if the board were to decide that there needed to be more time given the number of documents that are associated with the policy itself.
Thank you, Sherry, for that explanation. Any questions about the field trip policy? No? Go ahead, Board Member Cruz.
Thank you. So I appreciate the work that has gone into both of these policies and the urgency with which we're trying to address the issues around both of these policies. So I understand why we're trying to move on a fairly quick timeline here. That said, I actually don't feel like this field trip policy is ready for a vote at the end of the month. One of my concerns about it is that in the process of stripping out the procedures, there's really not much left here. It's a bunch of definitions, and it's basically a statement that we can't exclude people from field trips. And I worry about that. The board, more so than in any other part of the district, is highly accountable to the public, to our parents, to our staff, to the public in general. And the reason, they can vote us out if we don't meet their expectations or their standards. And it feels like this policy at this point, with all of the procedure removed from it, is putting that accountability completely in the administration. And the board is really just accountable to some definitions here. And I'm not comfortable with that. I would much rather see, at the very minimum, some cross-referencing going on to the procedures that keep our kids safe that are spelled out in the forms that were attached along with this policy. I would also like to see some of the transportation language brought back in so that it's very clear. The cross-referencing to our other transportation policy is in there, and it's very clear to everybody that you need to go to that policy to understand the details about transporting students, particularly if we're not using buses. This is a major policy, and I think we need to be really thoughtful about ensuring that we have a detailed enough board policy that the board can take some responsibility and accountability for what happens on our field trips. I also think that it would be really beneficial to run both the policy and the forms that go with it through some staff who are responsible for overnight field trips to get their feedback on whether or not, this seems both workable and also complete to them, that it covers all bases, that they completely understand what's expected of them, that they completely understand the procedures, particularly if something goes wrong. I would feel more comfortable as a board member if we got some feedback from staff and other potential chaperones on that. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Thank you, Board Member Carusi, for your comments. Board Member Morelli.
Yeah, I want to elevate what my colleague, Board Member Carusi said. I'm still concerned about this policy, and I honestly don't know if it's a policy that will address some of my concerns or a combination of a policy and practice. I think, the entire time as I was reading and reviewing the policy, I was thinking about where are we actually listening to our young people when they are calling us saying that something is wrong, or when parents are calling us and saying something's wrong. And I think that it's yes, I think that this making the policy bare is not the solution. And I'm not sure if my entire level of comfort it's going to come from a explicit policy or as a combination of those two. But at this point, I'm in agreement with Board Member Carusi around the policy, and I do like to see some safety nets for young people and families in regards to, and I know we are responding to a horrific incident that happened in our community that has impacted all of us, and some of us in a really direct and harmful way. And so I think that taking some time, I do appreciate having the eye of current chaperones, because I think that's one piece that we haven't talked, that hasn't been elevated, is like there were multiple adults in the situation that it's in our minds that have failed our young people and failed their parents. And so I'm trying to think of like what are some of the flow chart, or what are some of the safety nets that we can make sure that we provide to our young people so they're not falling in harm's way to the degree that we have set them. Thank you, Board Member Pierce.
Does someone want to answer that, or was that just a comment, Board Member Morelli? Okay, Dr. Jenkins.
Yeah, first of all, I'm really pleased to see that our board members are weighing in on this particular policy, as I stated earlier about the cameras. And as a part of the cameras, we're talking about field trips and anything that's going to protect our students more. I think that we have to interrogate it. And I think I've had conversations with multiple parents about the field trips in general. And the parents, I think it's fair. They've sent us communication, and they're just asking that we are very thoughtful about what can prevent anything in the future from what we know we just experienced. And I'm much like Board Member Morelli, I don't know if a policy in isolation is going to change that, but I think we must do the highest level of scrutiny, bringing it together, and not only just hearing from staff, but this policy should give parents, in particular parents who were on this most recent field trip that we've had all of this hardship about, an opportunity to perhaps engage with us in ways about the policy and in the pre-development of it before we have a final policy. A parent suggested that, and I just think that I'm more than willing to do that. I can engage, or our staff, we can engage parents on it, but this is something we have to do better on, and I am more than willing to have more conversation between us and see how we can put the highest level scrutiny on field trips. And it has to be something, I agree with you too, Board Member Carusi, the board must be involved with this. And I don't want any kind of situation where, not just me, I'm talking about beyond me, any superintendent should be in a situation where it's all of the discretion on a situation like this. And I think the staff just viewing it isn't good enough. We had staff on the last trip that's in question right now, but parents should have an opportunity to say, hey, not that that would be the final, but I think giving us all, lifting students' voices in this, as you said, Board Member Marilli, they told the adults, and we're the ones that have to do something about it. We can, and we will, and we should do better in this particular area. So I am okay with us having more discussion. I would love to see it go through in August, but I don't want us to, in October, but I don't want to rush it to get to it. I just think we need to have a serious sense of urgency. Perhaps it can get there. If it's not ready, let's not take it up just for the sake of taking it up. We can do this together. I know we can. We owe it to our students, to our parents, and our community.
Thank you for those comments, Dr. Jenkins. I do think that we can figure out a way, because I also share the same concerns about it as well, as other board members have said. So maybe we figure out, I know Board Member Gomes-Schmidt and Board Vice President Castro actually will be meeting with Sherry about the policies on the 8th. So maybe that's something that you guys discuss on, how to get back to that next phase where we may be able to vote. But if not, then what the next steps are for that. So if you guys can update us on that, that'd be great. Board Member Gomes-Schmidt.
Yeah, I'd just like to say that I agree with Board Member Carusi and Board Member Marilli on the pieces that they lifted here, as well as Dr. Jenkins. This is a really important policy for us to get right. And I do want to, Sherry, recognize you for the work that was done and the staff to revise the field trip forms that accompanied this, the A to G field trip forms. All of the recommendations that I could see were placed in there, and also the addition of the new form, Form H, for authorized chaperones. So I think that does a lot to strengthen. I think there's some additional things that can be added, like making sure that all staff members and chaperones are required to report to a principal and a district administrator if there's an incident. A way to confirm that staff and all authorized chaperones, any chaperone who's on that trip, know who to contact, and have the after hours phone numbers to be able to do that immediately. I think that's a procedure that we can work out along the way. And then just making sure in some of the forms that there's also a suggestion about making sure that both the district the chaperones understand the rules and regulations that staff would follow on these field trips. And not only that the staff member signs off that they were given, but the chaperone also signs off that they reviewed them and understand them. So I think there's a number of things that we can do in addition to strengthen this, and perhaps, again, put some of the procedure back in that has the crosswalks between other policies, like Board Member Carusi suggested with the transportation policy. So yeah, those are sort of my comments, and I look forward to continuing to work on this, and figuring out how to involve the community voice and the student voice in this is really important too. So thank you.
Board Member Vandermeulen.
Yes, I'm going to first say the one thing I really, really like about this policy is that no one can be excluded from field trips. As someone who was told, and a lot of people were, that I was an insurance liability and therefore might not be able to go to my trip to Paris because I was an insurance liability unless a parent went with. I unfortunately know what that's like, and I would rather no kid ever have to go through that. To be 100% honest, it's hard to get personal, but that one did her. But additionally, so I appreciate that part of the policy. But I do agree with Chris Carusi, my colleague. I do agree with Ananda. I do agree with Chris Gomes-Schmidt. It's not ready, not just because it's a big policy and the board is responsible. That's all set good and absolutely necessary. But what also needs to, Sherry is working her butt off. And God knows I'm hard on her as I am on everyone. And that's my apology. I'm trying. But very simply, what it comes down to is this. Let's have the policy committee work with her because she can't do everything herself. Not everything can be done by that. So I think the policy should run through the committee and then go through. So that way we can include the student voice. I want to hear the students. I want to hear the teachers. I want to hear from, if we have a translator, so that our English speaking students are able to understand what the rules are and not just understand it, are a part of the conversation. For all those reasons, I think that's why the vote should not be held on this yet. I didn't say forever, I just mean currently.
Are you possibly asking for a motion or something like that?
Maya, are you asking for action?
Yeah, I'm asking if Board Member Vandermeulen is asking for an action.
Yes, I'm asking that it be removed from the voting agenda.
I'm just going to chime in and say that, the regular board meeting agenda is not set. And so Board Member Gomes-Schmidt and I will meet with Ms. Terrell Webb and Dr. McGregory on October the 8th to incorporate this feedback. And we have heard the board, our colleagues loud and clear. Thank you that we need to spend more time on this given the severity of this policy, and want to reiterate the board's appreciation for Ms. Terrell Webb and Dr. McGregory for working on this. So thank you.
Thank you, Board. Vice President Castro. I do think you guys can reconvene on the 8th and talk about that and discuss, and just let us know and update. And if it ends up on the agenda, then it ends up on the agenda. If not, then we'll know why. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
So
Okay. We got Marilia, the adjournment, and Gomes-Schmidt as a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
It's 7-0. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you all. Thank
Bye,
you for
guys.
bearing with us with the technical difficulties.
good night.
Good night, everyone.
Nice job as always, Barb. Oh, I'm sorry that